Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome to number 44 of the open mic. A little bit of a special edition, I guess, but today, yesterday, the open mic, I had to cut it short. I had planned to do more, but we ran out of time. I wasn't sure we'd get to it anyway, but I want to get these depositions, one of them that we can get broadcast and presented, because there's so much good information. But I want to get as many as we can out so we can talk about them. And, you never know where it's going to lead information-wise. So, let's let everybody say hello. Susan has volunteered to help me read through these so we don't just have me doing the reading. It'll be a Q&A interactive kind of thing. I think that comes across better for everyone. So let's everybody say hello, and we'll get started. Linda, checking convictions.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thanks for being here.
Not Kratz. I'm sorry, Susan.
Haha, very funny. Hi, everybody. Happy November.
Mr. Jeff Jones, thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me. How's everybody doing? Nice to see you.
Everly.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Sunshine Christina.
Hi, everyone.
And Dr. Silkman.
Repeat after me. I am not addicted.
I knew that was coming.
Not addicted. Welcome,
Good
everyone.
one.
Welcome, everyone.
No, we're not addicted. It's crazy that there's so much information in these cases that we could just take sections, and it just takes so much time. I guess that for some of it we may dig we certainly dig under the surface a lot more than a lot of people do, but it's led us off in some really interesting avenues. Anyway, let's take a look here at where we're at. As everyone remembers, I did Mark Rohrer Part 1, and I began into Part 2, but I ran kind of long on time, so I paused it. So now let's continue with Part 2. We've got roughly 50 pages, probably a little bit less than that. Should go fairly quick, but as a recap, if everyone remembers this cross-examination, of course, the defense lawyers are trying to elicit specific things from these various witnesses, and they're armed with these interviews that Amy Lehman and Deb Strauss did. So they know when these people are trying to run and alter, and even during the Making Murder series, I don't remember if it was Glenn or Kelly that said you could see how these people were trying to change what they had told these investigators, some weeks or not weeks, but months before, and they just couldn't do it. So it's really interesting in that aspect. Anyway, they had talked about Rohrer and Griesbach had went to Madison. Rohrer wanted this situation brought forward. You know what? I forgot to get there's a Doug Jones memo. I should have loaded that up. Maybe I can do it here in a few minutes. When someone else is talking, I'll try to find that. The Doug Jones memo comes into play in this part of the deposition in Part 2. But nonetheless, Rohrer wanted this problem, and that he wanted it away or out of his office, because I think he knew that there was serious trouble, and he got dumped on him basically. So anyway, there were some other the various amounts of information, and he's also trying to elicit more information about Gregory Allen and what conversations were going about that. They talked about CCAP. I think that's actually on the prior page. They talked about CCAP, and that's their ability to go in and see various things within the criminal justice system. So anyway, we're going to start on page 90. I'm going to be the lawyer, and Susan's going to play the part of Mr. Rohrer in this one. And then and Griesbach's depositions that we're going to do next, she's going to be the lawyer, and I'm going to play Mr. Griesbach. So, are you ready, Susan?
I'm ready, Jack.
All right, here we go. This is PDF page, or I'm sorry, it's state page 90. It's PDF page 29. So, all right, here we go. By the time that you went to Madison to meet in the Attorney General's office, had you had further discussions with Mike Griesbach about Gregory Allen?
Yes.
How many?
I don't know.
Tell me what you recall of the contents of those discussions.
I don't recall those contents of the discussions.
At all?
No.
To your knowledge, at that time, had Mr. Griesbach been conducting any further inquiries about who Gregory Allen was, what was his record and so forth?
He or I may have done that.
Well, let's start with you. What did you do?
I'm not sure who did what, but we did do a criminal history check on Mr. Allen at the Sheriff's Department.
Anything further that you recall?
We had done the CCAP check before that.
Right.
He or I may have gotten a hold of the prior complaint out of the clerk's office. I forget who got it. It was either he or I.
Had the two of you, in respect to the search, made a decision to try and find out within the confines of the county, the Manitowoc government, whatever you could about Gregory Allen?
That was not what we were doing, no.
What did you consider that you were doing?
Just as I told you, we got a criminal history check on Mr. Allen from the Sheriff's Department. And I believe Mike or I obtained that complaint.
All right. With whom did you do the criminal history check in the Sheriff's Department?
I don't recall.
Not surprised. Was it Sheriff's Department personnel?
Yes.
Was it Mr. Beck?
I don't recall.
To your knowledge, what did they examine to respond to your inquiry?
They printed out a criminal history for us, and that was it.
Was it an extensive history, in your opinion?
I don't recall the history.
Tell me everything you recall that Brenda Peterson told you after she heard this information about Gregory Allen from you.
She may have, at a time, mentioned Mr. Allen. I don't recall what she said precisely.
Tell me your best recollection. I don't care whether it's precise or not. I want you to do your best recollection of what she told you.
I don't recall exactly what she said.
I'm not asking you exactly. I'm asking you your best recollection of what Brenda Peterson told you about Gregory Allen after you told her what you had been informed by the crime lab. Mr. Covelli, objection, asked and answered. Mr. McCambridge, and I'll object to Foundation Beyond. Does he have a recollection, and what he's already testified? Back to Mr. Kelly. You can answer.
And I don't recall what she said precisely.
Do you understand that I'm asking you not what you recall precisely, but what your best recollection is, whatever it may be?
I understand your question.
Okay. What is your best recollection of what Brenda Peterson told you?
I don't recall what she said verbatim.
I'm not asking you verbatim. I'm asking you at your best recollection of what she said. Come on. You're a lawyer. You know the difference that I'm talking about. Just give me your best recollection. Mr. Bascom, objection, argumentative. Mr. McCambridge, object. Mr. Covelli, if he has one. Mr. McCambridge, yeah, I think, well, why doesn't we establish that? Wait, back to Mr. Kelly. You can answer. Mr. McCambridge, as a foundation. Back to Mr. Kelly. You can answer.
If I may, which one am I answering?
Your best recollection, whatever it may be, general, precise, exact, specific, whatever, your best recollection of what Brenda Peterson told you after you told her about Gregory Allen. Mr. Cavalli, objection to the form of the question.
Again, she knew about Gregory Allen, and that's, again, I don't recall what she said.
Okay, well, let's try it this way then. Did she tell you what she had always believed from the beginning, that Gregory Allen had been the person who assaulted Penny Bernstein? Mr. Cavalli, objection to the form. Back to Mr. Kelly. You can answer.
I don't recall those exact words being used.
Okay, what do you recall were the words that she used in telling you what she believed about that?
There may have been mention that they believed that Allen was the perpetrator.
And who was the they that she was referring to?
She mentioned just in conversation about herself.
Well, you just said they, right? Was she referring to herself and Beverly Badker?
I am not sure. I'm just not sure. Like I said, I don't recall the conversation.
You were so disturbed about what you were told concerning the knowledge of Brenda Peterson and Beverly Badker that you contacted the Attorney General's office and asked them about that, right?
No. The purpose of contacting the Attorney General was to do an investigation about the file. That's why I contacted them, to do an independent investigation from my recollection.
But what caused you to want the independent investigation? Was that you had been told by Brenda Peterson, Beverly Badker, and perhaps others? Is that right?
No.
I'm going to ask you to take a moment and examine what in Exhibit 5 is in this proceeding. And I'm going to direct your attention to the third full paragraph from the bottom of the page, of the base page 005614. Have you had a chance to examine that?
Yes.
May I have it, please? The paragraph that I directed your attention to, I'm going to read it into the record. Soon after the mistake became public knowledge within the Manitowoc County Courthouse, the current district attorney, Mark Rohrer, started receiving information that people within the courthouse never believed that these crimes were committed by Avery. These people all believed Allen committed the crime. Some of these individuals even stated to D.A. Rohrer they made these concerns known to either the district attorney at the time, Dennis Vogel, or the Manitowoc County Sheriff, Tom Kosurik. First of all, did you tell that information to the Attorney General's office?
If Mr. Tinker said I did, I did.
Well, what's your recollection of whether or not this is accurately reciting what you told the Attorney General's office?
I did receive that information, yes.
And you did tell it to them?
Yes.
And the information that you received was from what sources?
As the document points, employees in the office and others.
Who were they?
There were some people in the sheriff's department. There were people in the office and the DA's office.
Okay, let's start with the DA's office. Who were the people in the DA's office?
Bev Badker and Brenda Peterson.
Bev Badker, Brenda. Okay, you said that again.
Bev Badker, Brenda Peterson.
Okay. And any others in the DA's office?
No.
Who were the people in the sheriff's office?
The names that were mentioned were Andy Colburn, and Jim Lake had information that he had received.
When you say the names that were mentioned, mentioned to whom?
I don't recall if they talked to me specifically or someone else, and the information then came to me.
And who would that someone else be?
Again, I don't recall how the information got to me. It's either through another source or from them directly.
So we know if it was directly from from them directly to you, then that's to you. But if it was through another source, who would that other source be?
It may have been Ken Peterson, the sheriff.
When did Ken Peterson speak with you, if he did, about the Stephen Avery case?
In September of 2003.
On one occasion or more than one occasion?
I don't recall the amount of occasions. At least one.
At least one. Did he initiate that contact with you, or did you initiate it with him?
You know, I'm not sure.
Okay. Where did it take place?
The sheriff's department.
Anyone else present?
I don't recall the individuals that were there.
But there was more than just you and the Sheriff Peterson.
Yes.
How many people more?
I don't recall the individuals who were there. It was just myself, Ken, and others.
And were the others from the Sheriff's Department?
Yes.
Were they from anywhere else, to your knowledge?
Mike Griesbach might have been there.
What were you told? What were you guys told?
I don't recall what was told at that time in that meeting.
Tell me to your best recollection of what was said to you at the meeting.
I don't recall.
What was the discussion about Andy Colburn?
Nope, was not my recollection. We weren't discussing Andy. May have. I don't know.
Well, I thought you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought your prior testimony that led me to this entire dialogue is that you received some information from some other source, information about Andy Colburn and Jim Link in respect to Gregory Allen.
In regard to this case, that's what I said in regard to the Avery case.
Okay. So what were you told at that meeting about Andy Colburn and Jim Link?
I don't recall.
You have no recollection at all?
I don't recall.
What were you told at the meeting about what one or more members of the Sheriff's Department believed about Gregory Allen?
I don't recall.
Was Gregory Allen brought up at the meeting?
Yes.
By whom?
I don't recall.
Got a theme going here. Did Ken Peterson talk about Gregory Allen?
He may have.
Did Ken Peterson produce any documents?
From my recollection, yes.
Did he go to the safe to get them?
Not that I'm aware of. I didn't.
Did he go into his own desk to get them?
I don't know.
Did he discuss with you at that meeting Tom Kosoric?
Yes.
Did he tell you anything about Tom Kosoric having been informed about Gregory Allen at the time of Stephen Avery's prosecution?
You know, I don't recall what he said about Tom Kosoric during that meeting.
You have no recollection?
I do not recall what he said.
Did he talk at all about Tom Kosoric having been provided information by a man named Berggren who worked for the City of Manitowoc Police Department at the time of the Stephen Avery case?
I don't recall that.
About how long did that meeting last?
Less than an hour, I'd say.
Was Mr. Beck present?
I don't recall.
Was Mr. Colburn present?
I don't recall.
Was Mr. Link present?
I don't recall.
Other than the people that you've identified, do you know anybody else who was present?
As I said earlier, Mr. Griesbach may have been present.
Other than him, anybody else that you recall?
I don't recall.
Did you keep any notes of that meeting?
No, I did not.
To your knowledge, did Mr. Griesbach?
I don't know if he did or not. You'd have to ask him.
Was there a reason that you didn't keep any notes of the meeting?
I just didn't.
In the conversations that you had with Ms. Burns, Peterson and Ms. Badker, did you keep any notes of that?
No, I did not.
Do you recall whether before you went to Madison to meet at the Attorney General's office, Mr. Finley had made a public demand that there be an investigation of what happened in the Stephen Avery prosecution?
He may have done that. I don't recall when he made that request.
Do you have any recollection of whether, before you went to Madison, the Attorney General had made a statement that he could not conduct such an investigation because she didn't have any statutory authority to do so?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall anything like that having occurred?
There was a thought initially that there may be a potential conflict of interest, that they couldn't do the investigation.
What was the conflict of interest that was perceived at that time?
The Attorney General's office had done the appellate work on the original case.
At a point in time, you made a formal request of the Attorney General's office to review the circumstances of the arrest and prosecution of Stephen Avery. Is that right?
I did.
I'll show you what's been marked as Exhibit 1. Is that the request?
Yes.
That request was made after the meeting in Madison. Is that right?
I don't recall.
Jeez.
I believe we had discussed them doing a review at the time of the meeting, and that it was decided that they would be doing a review before we went down there. The reason why is we had to give a special prosecution basis for it. And I think that's what that is in there, 978.06.
So when you were in Madison, you talked about 978.06 as a basis for the request.
We had talked about them doing a review, and they needed to have a written request, as you have in front of you.
They needed more than that, though. They needed a statutory basis, didn't they?
Yep.
And that was something that you discussed when you were in Madison.
I don't recall if that precise discussion took place. We had to do a request in writing, as I did.
Well, in fact, there had been a discussion about whether they could give you what you wanted, which is, did they have the authority? There was an issue about whether or not they had the authority to conduct the kind of investigation that you wanted.
Correct. They had to be made, in essence, a special prosecution of the case.
Right. So that was the strategy that you and they agreed upon that led to the creation of Exhibit Number 1.
I wouldn't call it strategy. It's something that had to be done.
Well, in order for you to get the investigation done, the two of you had to agree that there was a statutory basis for it, right?
I had to make the request, yes.
Well, but the suggestion that you make the request was made by the Attorney General's office to you, not vice versa. They said, okay, we need a basis. Here's the basis. You then wrote the letter.
That may have taken place, yes.
Okay. And then they responded to the letter in Exhibit 2. Is that right?
May I review it, please?
Sure.
Okay. I've reviewed the Exhibit 2.
Okay. So that was the response to your request. Is that right?
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
Now, you are represented here today by Mr. McCambridge from the Attorney General's office. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
And is the reason for that representation that you are a state employee?
Yes.
All right. And you are not represented by any of the other lawyers who are here to represent parties in the litigation. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And you're not represented by the Corporation Counsel from Manitowoc County. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. At any time before you authored this September 18th, 2003 correspondence, did you talk with any representative of the Attorney General's office about the potential civil liability for Manitowoc County in connection with the prosecution and conviction of Stephen Avery?
I may have.
Did you discuss that with Mr. Tinker?
I may have. I don't recall.
Did you discuss that with Mr. Barr at all?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you discuss that with Peg Lunchlower?
I may have. I don't recall.
All right. Before you went up to Madison with Mr. Griesbach, did you have any discussion with Mr. Hollins about the potential civil liability for Manitowoc County in connection with the prosecution and conviction of Stephen Avery?
I may have, yes.
Okay. Tell me what you recall of that discussion.
I don't recall the discussion other than that was a potential thing that we saw that could potentially happen here.
And was it a part of your discussions at all, the discussion that in order to deal with the issue of potential civil liability, you would ask to have an investigation done by the Attorney General?
I don't recall if I told that to Mr. Rollins. I may have.
Okay. In fact, he may have suggested it to you.
No, that was my decision. I made that on my own.
Okay.
No one made that suggestion but me.
Okay.
You were fearful of the potential liability of Manitowoc County in respect to what had happened to Mr. Avery. Why is that an answer?
I think that's a question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and answer it.
I was not fearful of it.
No, you were concerned about it.
I wasn't concerned about it.
You didn't care about it?
Not that I didn't care about it, but it wasn't my situation to worry about. My job was to preserve the integrity of the file in my office.
Well, your job went beyond that in your own mind because you were asked for this. You asked for this investigation to be done, right?
That's part of the integrity of my office, so I don't think it is going beyond that.
So you were concerned about the integrity of your office.
To have an independent investigation done.
What was it about your office's integrity that you were concerned about?
I just wanted an independent review.
Okay.
That's all.
Had Mr. Griesbach expressed any opinion to you about the behavior of Mr. Vogel at the time you made your request of the Attorney General?
He had prepared a memo about a conversation he had with Mr. Vogel. I don't recall its contents.
I know that he did. But what I'm asking you, whether or not he talked with you at all about any concerns that he personally had about how Vogel had handled the case.
I don't recall those conversations.
Did they take place at all? Mr. Govelli asked and answered.
I don't recall what was said.
Was there such a conversation?
There may have been, yes.
Okay. Tell me to your best recollection, it doesn't have to be precise or exact, of what Mike Griesbach said to you about that. Mr. Govelli, objection, no foundation, form of question.
I don't recall what Mike said during that conversation other than he had a telephone conversation with Vogel. That's all I remember at this time.
He was upset about the conversation with Vogel, wasn't he?
I don't recall if he was upset or not.
He didn't like what Vogel was doing, and he told you that. Is that right?
I don't recall him saying that, no.
Okay. Did you ever talk to Janine Gesk? I'm saying that right and wrong. Geske or Gesk?
Geske?
Okay. Did you ever talk to Janine Geske before you went to see the Attorney General's office?
I believe Mike may have done that.
Did he report to you on the conversation that he had with Miss Geske?
He may have.
What did he tell you?
I don't recall.
Do you recall anything about what he had told you concerning that?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay. Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 124. Take a moment, if you would, and examine that.
I'm familiar with the document.
Okay. Who's Douglas Jones?
Assistant District Attorney for Manitowoc County.
All right. Is this memo to your understanding?
It speaks for itself. We had a telephone conversation with Jean Couchet about the case.
All right. This memo is dated the same day that your letter to the Attorney General is dated, September 18th. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall whether or not Mr. Jones provided this memo to you before or after you wrote the letter to the Attorney General?
I don't recall.
Of course you don't. Okay. In this memo, Mr. Jones says, in talking with Jean Couchet, Couchet told Jones that in 95 or 96, Colburn had told Kosoric that an officer from Brown County had told Colburn that Greg Allen and not Stephen Avery may have actually committed the Bernstein assault. Do you see that?
The language that you're reading from is about might have actually committed the Bernstein assault. Is that the reference you're making?
I'm stating on the sentence. Let's read it into the record. Quote, he then told me, close quote, and the he refers to Jean Couchet. Quote, he then told me that in 95 or 96, Andy Colburn had told Tom Kosoric, former Manitowoc County Sheriff, that an officer from Brown County had told Colburn that Allen and not Avery might have actually committed the Bernstein assault. Jean stated that Colburn was told by Kosoric something to the effect that we already have the right guy and he should not concern himself, close quote. So this isn't information that's being provided to you on September 18th by Doug Jones, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Did you provide this information to the Attorney General's office?
Yes. My recollection is I believe we did.
And who's we?
Mike Griesbach and I, when we went to Madison.
But this memo was drafted after you had been to Madison.
I'm not sure the date we were in Madison.
Well,
I'd have to look at the record to see when we went.
Don't pass out now. Exhibit number 1, September 18th, is when you write the letter following the decision that's made about the statutory basis that you're going to seek for the investigation.
Again, I apologize. I do not know whether or not this was done at the same time that we met with the Attorney General or before. I don't have the precise date in mind when we met with the Attorney General. It was around that time.
Okay, so you're telling me that you don't remember whether or not you had the information in an Exhibit 124 when you went to Madison.
This collar's getting tight. My recollection is that I believe I did. I'm not sorry.
And you're saying that you told the information to the Attorney General's office.
We passed everything we had obtained to the Attorney General's office.
Okay, well, neither this memo nor anything about Colburn and Link is in any of the records that we were provided to the Attorney General's office. I can tell you that. Does that give you any concern about whether or not you provided this information, that is to say the information in Exhibit 124, to the Attorney General's office?
And again, it's my recollection that we did do that. And I don't know for sure, but my recollection at this time.
Well, there's only two people in the, quote, we. It's you and Mike Griesbach, right?
In the what?
In the we that you're talking about when you say we.
Right.
Nobody else went to Madison, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you and Mike were there, you met with certain people in the Attorney General's office. You told us about that, right?
Correct.
So if this information was provided to the Attorney General's office, either you did it or Mike Griesbach did it, in your best recollection.
From my recollection, I believe that's what was done. I'm not certain, but again, I just have a vague recollection that was done.
Did you personally give the information to Peg Lutschlauer?
We turned over the entire Avery file to...
I know that. I'm asking you about your recollection. Mr. McCambridge, we can be courteous. Okay, well, all right, you're right.
We turned over.
I apologize. I withdraw that question. Let me ask it another way. You told us on that day that you met with the Attorney General.
And I don't recall the date that I met with the Attorney General.
Mr. McCambridge, the question is if you would really listen to the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You told us that you met with the Attorney General, yes or no?
Yes.
Back to Mr. Kelly. Okay, did you personally provide the information in Exhibit 124 that we're talking about here that I've read into the record to the Attorney General?
To my recollection, I could be wrong. I believe we turned over, this was contained within the materials we turned over to the Attorney General. We turned over the entire file, as I stated earlier.
Okay. Mr. McCambridge, let me try to help. The question was, did you give this information, not this document? Did you give this, if I understand your question, did you give this information to the Attorney General? Yes or no? Or you don't know? I mean, whatever.
I don't know. I'm saying from my recollection, I believe I did.
Back to Mr. Kelly. Okay. Did you give it to her in oral form, or did you turn over this document, Exhibit 124, over to her?
I don't.
Mr. Cabelli, object to form.
I don't recall if it was oral or as the whole file, sir.
Back to Mr. Kelly. Do you have any belief, as you sit here today, as to whether or not you or Mike Griesbach at any point in time turned over Exhibit 124 to any representative of the Attorney General's office?
I believe we had done so, but I'm just not certain.
Okay. Apart from the document, do you have any recollection of whether or not, or whether you or Mike Griesbach provided to representatives of the Attorney General's office the information that's contained in Exhibit 124 that we've read into the record about what Couchet found out about Colburn and Link?
Again, we may have.
But you don't recall.
Of course, I don't recall. I don't recall, but we may have.
When you received this information from Douglas Jones on September 18th, that's set forth in Exhibit 124.
Yes.
Was it disturbing to you that the information reported that Kosarik said something to the effect that we already have the right guy and he should not concern himself?
I didn't have an opinion about whether or not it was disturbing or not to me.
Let's pause right here. We're on line 16. I want to pause we've been reading for a few minutes. Pause for commentary. Anyone?
Good Lord. I don't recall, Jack.
Dr. Silkman?
I don't actually recall the conversation. I'm sorry, I can't help
Yeah, I think I'm really like inspired by these people. I think I might write a country song called "I Don't Recall." Anyway,
we need to get with Stacy on that, don't we?
So the one thing that I did seriously that I did get out of part of the interview is that it seems that they're actually getting somewhere. The questions are like, it sounds like it's nitpicky, but they are pulling information out. And that's what I'm noticing, is that I think in earlier in the interview that you were talking, or in this, you were talking about, there was a back and forth. And it says, who was in the meeting with you? Well, this guy was here. Anybody else? Sure, there was other people. Were they all Manitowoc? No, they were mostly. Well, who else was there? Oh, I guess Griesbach could have been there. Oh, now you see, so they're pulling in. It is working. That's what I'm hearing. It's working to a degree.
It is. It's really slow pulling stuff out. But what I find really disturbing, and others can comment on it as well. I did see Travis in the live chat. As he's went through, and I'm talking about Rohrer. Clearly these are important conversations that he's had with Mike Griesbach, Bev Badker, Peterson, Miss Peterson, Brenda Peterson, that Geske, and other people, he didn't take any notes. I mean, come on, this guy's the attorney. He is the DA of the county. I mean, wouldn't he take notes?
I don't believe that. I don't
either.
think he's lying.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't either. Kelly is really good at telling the story, right? So even though Rohrer is trying to act like he doesn't recall anything, Kelly is putting the story on the record. Because every time he asks the question a slightly different way, like Jeff was saying, he gets a little bit more of the puzzle onto the record. And it's really interesting. And I find it very hard to believe that a DA running the county who has the biggest wrongful conviction case in the state, hell, probably in the country at that time, is not taking notes of everything that's going on.
You would think.
Yeah. He's not, I mean, attorneys, that it's like 101 law school. It's first year stuff. You make notes. I guess you never admit to making notes, but you take notes, right?
Right, because if he admitted to it, he'd have to produce them or explain why he doesn't have them, right? So that leads to even more questions.
No. I think it's really good for doing these open mics and getting the stuff out there, because it's allowing everyone to see just how desperate they all were at this moment in time. It was all coming apart at the seams.
Absolutely.
Everything they had done to Stephen Avery was just being laid out there for everyone in the world to see.
And how far do you, just personal opinion, not necessarily anything from fact, and others can answer as well. How far do you think that they would have went to have kept this out of the public forum? And I mean, I'm talking about, let's just say that the depositions moved forward, they got more information, and the, judges typically say, hey, look, you guys need to go off in the corner and settle this before it goes to trial. That's pretty typical in most civil suits, especially ones of any real value. And this was in the millions of dollars. And they went to and said, come back and said, we can't settle on a price. They won't settle. We're going to court. How far do you think that they would have went to have kept this out of federal court?
36 million?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, but I mean, having this information out in the public, and there's certainly a whole lot more here. We don't have the exhibits to produce. I wish we did. Yeah.
Well, if they had settled for 36 million, it wouldn't have gone to court.
Well, no. Well, I mean, I don't know what it would have taken, to move forward, and let's just say they did settle. I mean, to me, I think 5 to 8 million. Maybe I'm stretching it, but considering everything, I'm just throwing that out there. 5 to 8 million.
It would have been, it would have been 5 to 8 million for Stephen Avery, but then you would have started having the other lawsuits. Penny Bernstein would have been able to sue, right? And then any other victims of Gregory Allen that had happened during Stephen Avery's incarceration. Then you got to have the restructuring of law enforcement or Manitowoc County law enforcement, because how did this occur? Well, then you've got to have the analyzation of the DOJ, because how the hell did they whitewash this? Well, then the crime lab.
You got to think about it, even before you even get to that level. Could that have opened up other things? I'm just talking about in the county of Manitowoc alone. What other cans of worms could have came out of that? I just.
Well, we have the Randall Matea case. That's another very, very sketchy conviction. Whether he did it or not, that's still possible. But the way he got convicted is just dead ass wrong. It really is. Yeah. And it's, hopefully we'll get to present that, and people can see that bleached jeans were not something new to the story for Stephen Avery's case. They were actually used in another case prior to that, which is just unbelievable to me.
Doc, do you have a comment?
I was going to say, just getting back on what we're discussing, there's no doubt about it that Glenn and Kelly, they were masterfully and skillfully trying to extract teeth.
Yes.
Now, this particular case is unique because Kelly and Glenn already knew the answers, right? These guys had already given statements to the investigators. So the statements that they gave were fairly extensive. And the people that gave these statements believed that it was behind closed doors, it was going to go nowhere, right? So they would have been very candid, very open. Now with the civil suit and the fact that all those documents were sequestered, Kelly and Glenn were giving the people that were giving depositions a chance to come clean, right? A chance to say, look, this is what happened, this is what I said. But what you find is, if you look through Dvorak right through to Mark Rohrer, they use the excuse of, I don't recall, I don't remember, consistently. That's not my verbiage, etc., etc. And really, Kelly and Glenn must have been laughing their heads off inside, thinking, guys, you're on toast, right? So, in essence, this was a real bizarre type of deposition because the attorneys, the civil suit attorneys, already knew what the answers were. So they're building up this incredible momentum, and guess who they're going to dump on? They're going to dump on Kacerik and Vogel.
Absolutely.
And what Sunshine Christina said is absolutely correct. Do we have a motive? Do we have a clear direction? Do we have desperate men? And the answer is you bloody damn betcha. Yep. Because as we've already seen, what happens is these type of civil suits are not restrictive to one case. And Sunshine Christina said it perfectly by saying, if you targeted Stephen Avery deliberately, it meant that you left Gregory Allen to continue stalking, raping, you name it, for 10 additional years. And I was a victim, or my mother was a victim, my friend was a victim. I'm telling you, it would have the negative press alone would have destroyed the likes of Kacerik and Vogel. They knew it. And that's why these depositions, guys, is so important, because the guilters go, well, why would they have my God, you're seeing the motive right here. Whitewash, clean everything up, but you can tell these were desperate men.
Absolutely. And possibly a few desperate women as well.
Oh, yes. Correct. The whole reputation of the MTSO under the tutelage of Kacerik would have been called into question. And guess what other case they would have looked at? Ricky Hoxletter, right?
Absolutely.
So all the cases that were handled under the tutelage of Kacerik all would have been reinvestigated. So where there's smoke, there's fire. If he did it once, how do you know they didn't do it multiple times? There you go.
Yeah, and I think that whatever motivations, right, wrong, or indifferent, that Peg Launchlar may have had, there was absolutely no way that she was going to rule in favor. She was going to rule against whatever happened in Manitowoc. There's just no way.
With Peg, all the roads were going to lead to her office, right? She's the Attorney General.
Yep.
All the roads eventually would have led to her own office. So she knew she had to whitewash the entire investigation, right? And as a consequence of that, Stephen Avery was left with no option but to go with the civil suit route. Because think about it, he sat in prison for 12 additional years. He could have got out much, much earlier, had Colburn, Lenk, and everybody else used their brain and thought, uh-oh, we made a mistake here. Better to settle this now. No. What they did is that they deliberately swept it under the carpet. It's the old boys club. You look after me, I look after you. And that is precisely what's happening now in 2021.
That's right.
Exactly the same.
That's exactly right. It's, as people have said, it's a very political hot potato. I just don't think there's any way possible they'll, as Kathleen said, they'll spend their last dime trying to defend this. So
correct. Because the outcome, like I said, in Australia we have things called royal commissions, and royal commissions, they don't care who is being targeted, whether you're a supreme judge, a police commissioner, it makes no difference, a high-flying lawyer. If you've done wrong, you'll be found out. But what's critical here, guys, what is critical here are whistleblowers, the ones that give information that's privy, in other words, internal information. I'm telling you now, Glenn and Kelly got the entire roadmap of what happened, likely from Bergner.
Oh, yeah, and I really wish we had that exhibit so we could read through it.
Correct.
And there's
Correct.
actually a few other ones as well, but that one is critical, where they went and talked to the Kosoric. I mean, we know that happened. So
that's correct.
Okay, if there's not really been able to, I've kind of scanned through here, but I didn't really see any questions. Has anybody seen any questions from anyone in the chat? And I know that we're here to listen to the content, but if there's any questions before we continue on.
I don't recall any questions.
You don't recall? I can't believe he said that many times, and he's going to continue to say, as I can see this from right here. Okay, we paused at line 16. Are you ready to continue?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm going to start. Here we go. Had you received at that time from any other source information that Kosoric was taking that position generally with regard to any other suspect in the Stephen Avery case, that he had the right guy? Don't concern yourself about anybody else. Had you received that information from any other source that this exhibit 124 at the time that you received this exhibit 124?
Guess what, Mr. Kelly?
I bet you just don't recall. Mm-hmm. Okay. In the meeting that took place in Ken Peterson's office at the Sheriff's Department, had anybody provided any information of that kind to you?
Of what kind, please?
Of the kind that when Sheriff Kosoric was provided that information about Gregory Allen or some other suspect in the Penny Bernstein sexual assault, that he was taking the position, don't worry about it, we've got the right guy.
You mean, did anyone say that during the meeting? Is that your question?
Or words to that effect.
Well, they may have. I don't recall.
Question, let's go off the record for a minute. And they go off, come back. Mr. Rohrer, in response to the formal request that you made, which you identified to us in Exhibit Number 1, was ultimately a report issued in December by the Attorney General's office.
If I could see it, it may refresh my recollection when it was issued.
I'll show you Exhibit 6.
Okay. I do recognize Exhibit 6, sir.
Okay. And what's it to your recollection about it being in December?
It's dated December of 2003.
Okay.
I recognize the report.
All right. At any time between when you first heard from the woman at the crime lab and you received Exhibit Number 6, the report, did you receive or did you have any discussions with Jim Fitzgerald about the Stephen Avery matter?
No.
Again, during that same period of time, now we're talking about between September 3 and December 17th. Did you talk with Dennis Vogel
Nope.
At any time during that period of time, did you talk with Tom Kosoric?
Yes.
On how many occasions?
I do not know.
More than one?
I do not know.
At least one.
Yes.
Where was the one that you recall?
I don't recall.
How long did it last?
Oh, less than an hour.
It was present.
I don't recall.
Well, it was at least you and Kosoric, right?
Yes.
Okay. Was there anyone else present?
I don't recall.
Was Ms. Mike Griesbach present?
I don't recall.
What was the occasion for that conversation with Kosoric? How did it come about? How did the meeting come about?
I don't recall.
Was it initiated by you?
I don't recall.
Was it initiated by Mr. Kosoric?
I don't recall.
Did you talk about the Stephen Avery case?
Yes.
Tell me everything that you recall that you talked about with him.
I don't recall what was said.
You recall nothing of the meeting?
I recall that a meeting took place. We discussed Stephen Avery. I don't recall.
Did you discuss Gregory Allen?
May have.
Did you discuss Tom Bergner?
I don't recall.
Did you discuss what you had been told at the meeting with Ken Peterson?
I don't recall.
Did you discuss what Brenda Peterson and Beverly Badker told you?
I don't recall.
Did you make any notes of your meeting with Kosoric?
I did not.
Recalled that right quick. Is there any reason? Is there a reason why you didn't?
I just didn't.
All right. You knew that there was an investigation going on at the time by the Department of Justice concerning Mr. Kosoric's behavior, right?
I don't recall when I had the meeting with Mr. Kosoric as it related to the investigation.
Well, we've already discussed the fact that it took place sometime between when you received the information from the crime lab and when the report was issued, right?
Correct.
So, are you saying that your conversation with Kosoric took place sometime between September 3 and September 18th?
That's possible, yes.
Okay. So that would be a period of time in which you were talking with Mr. Tinker about your concerns respecting the Stephen Avery prosecution, right?
Concerns with information I received in regard to the Stephen Avery prosecution.
Well,
based on the exhibit you showed me earlier.
Exhibit number 5 that we've already discussed. I'm going to read this paragraph for you. It follows the paragraph we read earlier. It says, quote, D. Rohrer expressed his concerns about these allegations to the Attorney General's office and requested an independent review. The focus of this review would be to determine if Allen was ever a suspect in this investigation, and, if so, was this information turned over to the defense attorneys as part of the discovery procedure? Close quote. Okay? So that is something that you told the Attorney General's office that you wanted. Mr. Cabelli, objection to farm.
Is that right?
That's my line.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Is that right?
I don't recall precisely what I said, but if Mr. Tinker stated I said it, I'd have no reason to doubt him.
And part of the concern about whether or not the information concerning Gregory Allen was handled properly in the prosecution to your knowledge at that time, that is to say at the time of your meeting at the Attorney General's office, concerned the behavior of former Sheriff Kosoric. Is that right? Mr. Murray, form of the question.
If you could repeat the question, please.
Sure. Part of your concern when you went and talked to the Attorney General was whether or not Kosoric had behaved properly with respect to the investigation insofar as information concerning Gregory Allen was involved. Mr. Murray, same objection.
Again, I just wanted to make sure that an independent review was done on the file to make sure everything was handled properly was my concern.
By the sheriff as well as the district attorney's office, right?
In the entire case as a whole, yes.
Okay. And what I'm trying to get here is that you've told us that you have an hour-long conversation with Sheriff Kosarik.
I believe I said less than an hour, if I recall my answer to your questions, sir.
Recalled that right quick. Okay. Can you fix the approximate time period? Or approximate period of time?
I cannot.
And at the time that you talked to Kosarik, you were an experienced criminal lawyer, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yet you made no notes of your conversation with Kosarik. Mr. Murray, object as an argumentative. Is that right?
I stated earlier I did not make notes. No.
Okay. Can you tell me why?
I just didn't make notes.
Mr. Covelli, asked and answered. Back to Mr. Kelly. Well, I know you just didn't make notes, but I'm asking you what your state of mind was at the time as to why you did not make notes.
I just didn't make the notes.
When you went to the Attorney General's office and talked to them about the case, did you tell the representatives of the Attorney General's office about the conversation that you had with Kosarik?
I don't recall.
Did you tell the representatives of the Attorney General's office about the conversations that you had with Sheriff Kosarik or Sheriff Peterson?
I don't recall.
At any time between when you first received the phone call from the representative of the crime laboratory in December 17th, when the report was published by the Attorney General, did you talk with Ms. Bernstein?
Yes.
On how many occasions?
I don't recall.
More than one?
At least once.
Okay. And was the once in person or by phone?
What were the dates again, please?
Between September 3rd and December 17th of 2003.
I don't recall if it was on the phone or in person.
Who initiated the contact?
I don't recall.
What was the reason for the contact?
I don't recall.
What did Ms. Bernstein say to you?
I don't recall. She was pleased with how I was handling the case. That I do recall.
What did you say to her?
I don't recall.
Did she tell you anything about how disturbed she was that it turned out that Gregory Allen, who had attacked her? Mr. Bascom, I'm going to object to the form of that question.
I don't recall that being said.
Back to Mr. Kelly. Did she tell you anything about the contact that she had received from Thomas Bergner at the time of the events in question, after she had been attacked and before the actual trial? Mr. Bascom, objection to the form. Mr. Pollen, I object also. It assumes facts not in evidence. Back to Mr. Kelly. You can answer.
I apologize because of the objections. May I have the question repeated back?
Sure. Did Penny Bernstein, in her conversation with you, tell you anything about any information she had received from Thomas Bergner concerning another possible assailant than Stephen Avery, that at a period of time between when she was attacked and when trial began?
I don't recall.
Did she tell you anything about a phone call that she had received at home from a city of Manitowoc police officer raising a question of whether or not Stephen Avery was a proper defendant in the case?
I don't recall that.
Do you have any recollection of anything that she told you?
As I stated earlier, she was pleased with how I was handling the case and complimented me on that. That I recall.
It's all about you, buddy. Anything else that you remember that she told you?
Well, she was upset with the fact that Stephen Avery was convicted.
Did she tell you why she was upset?
I don't recall.
Did she tell you anything about her concerns as to how the sheriff conducted himself?
I don't recall.
Is there anything further that you recall of the conversation with Miss Bernstein?
No.
What was it that you did that she was pleased with? Mr. Murray, Foundation, if you know, back to Mr. Kelly, as she expressed it to you.
Well, how professionally we handled the situation, how quickly we moved on the situation, how thorough we were with the situation. She was very pleased with that.
Well, you didn't do anything, did you? You just asked the Attorney General to conduct an investigation. Mr. McCambridge, objection. Mr. Murray, argumentative. Mr. McCambridge, that's a little snotty. Mr. Kelly, boy? What the hell? Question. What was it about your behavior that she liked? Mr. Cavalli, asked and answered. Mr. Murray, Foundation, go ahead and answer.
I already answered that question. I said that she was pleased with how we handled ourselves with the situation. How professional.
Back to Mr. Kelly. Who's we?
Mike and I.
Did you tell her anything about what you had found out in the course of the discussions with Kasorik, Peterson, or any other representatives of the Sheriff's Department?
I don't recall.
At any time between September 3rd and when you received the information that you did from the crime lab on December 17th, did you have any discussions with any representatives of the city of Manitowoc?
Yes.
With whom?
Perry Kingsbury, Tom Bergner.
Did you meet with them together or separately?
My recollection is they were together.
Where did the meeting take place?
City of Manitowoc Police Department.
Did it take place before you went to the Attorney General's office or after?
I don't recall.
Do you recall whether the information that you received in the meeting that you had with those people, was information that you provided to the Attorney General's office?
Myself or Mr. Griesbach?
Mr. Griesbach was at the meeting as well.
Yes.
Was there anyone else at the meeting?
From my recollection, I don't recall other than those four.
Was Jim, how do you pronounce that, Wise?
Wise.
With Jim,
Either one.
was Jim Wise at the meeting?
No.
What was the occasion for the meeting? How did it come about?
I don't recall.
Did you ask for something, or ask for the meeting, or did they volunteer to meet with you?
I asked for the meeting.
And why did you ask for the meeting?
To discuss the case.
Well, why discuss the case as to them? What knowledge did you have that caused you to want to meet with Perry Kingsbury and Tom Bergner?
I don't recall.
You did have information about Tom Bergner at the time that you called for that meeting?
I don't recall.
Well, how did you select him to be involved in the meeting?
He was just there.
Whom had you contacted to have the meeting?
I believe myself or Mike Griesbach contacted Perry Kingsbury.
And did this take place after the meeting that you had with at Ken Peterson's office?
I don't recall.
What prompted you or Mike Griesbach to call for this meeting?
To discuss the case.
What did Tom Bergner tell you at the meeting?
He mentioned Gregory Allen's name, that they were doing surveillance on him at the time, and at the time that this incident took place.
Anything further?
That's all I recall at this time.
Did he tell you that he had talked to Cont about the surveillance that they had been doing at Gregory Allen?
I don't recall.
Did he provide to you any of the documents from the investigation of Gregory Allen that they had been conducting at the time?
I don't recall.
Did he tell you that he had provided extensive documentary information to Perry Kingsbury about the investigation that was being conducted of Gregory Allen at the time that Penny Bernstein was assaulted?
I recall a file being present during the meeting. That was discussed.
Kingsbury say anything to you at the meeting about what his reaction had been when Bergner produced that file and gave it to him?
I don't recall.
Do you remember anything being said where Kingsbury said, "Hey, I don't want it," or anything like that?
I don't recall.
Did you ask to see the file?
I don't recall.
Did you in fact see the file?
I don't recall.
Did you see any of the investigatory reports that were made concerning Gregory Allen for the period of time between January of 85 and August 2nd of 85 by members of the City of Manitowoc Police Department?
I don't recall.
Do you recall whether you looked at any documents at that meeting?
May have looked at some of the reports in there.
Did Bergner tell you that they had put Allen specifically under surveillance for the period of time between the 14th of July and the 2nd of August, 1985, because they perceived him to be extremely dangerous with respect to sexual violence? Mr. Covelli, objection, form?
I don't recall.
Back to Mr. Kelly. Anything further that you recall of the conversation between you, Griesbach, Kingsbury, and Bergner at that meeting?
I think they may have had a code name for Allen at that time that was brought up, but I don't recall the code name.
The Sandman?
I don't recall.
Does that ring a bell at all?
All I know is there was a code name they had for him.
Okay. Did you make any memorandum concerning that meeting?
Nope, I did not.
To your knowledge, did Mr. Griesbach make any memorandum?
I don't know.
Did you discuss with Mr. Griesbach about whether or not you should be making a memorandum?
No,
Did you provide the information from the meeting, whatever it was, to the Attorney General's office?
I don't recall.
After that meeting, did you have any discussions with Jim Weiss about the Stephen Avery prosecution?
No,
Have you, to this day, had any such discussions?
no,
To your knowledge, has Mr. Rollins?
I don't know.
Mr. Rollins talked to you at all about the potential liability for the city of Manitowoc in this case?
No,
After you received the information from the crime lab on September 3rd, did you talk with Judge Hazelwood about this case at all?
yes,
On how many occasions?
I don't know.
Did you talk to him about the Gregory Allen at all?
Yes,
Was Mr. Griesbach with you at any of the occasions in which you talked to Judge Hazelwood about this case?
yes,
Was it in an in-person meeting or was it a meeting that took place over the phone?
in person.
One or more than one? One or more than one?
More than one.
It took place in the judge's chambers or elsewhere?
Judge's chambers and his office.
Okay, more than two meetings?
I don't recall.
All right. Was the information that you had received from Bergner and Kingsbury discussed with Judge Hazelwood?
That I received?
Well, that you and Griesbach received when you met with him?
I don't recall.
Was the fact that Bergner and the Manitowoc City Department had been surveilling Gregory Allen information that you discussed with Judge Hazelwood?
I don't recall.
What do you recall of the discussions between you and Griesbach and Judge Hazelwood about the Stephen Avery case?
We let him know about the results of the DNA. We let him know that we reviewed the file and it was our intention to dismiss the case. That's what I recall.
So this would be the first meeting with Judge Hazelwood that took place before you actually filed the formal papers concerning the dismissal.
Yes.
And that dismissal, I can tell you, took place on the 10th of September, 2003, okay? Is that all right?
If that's the date, if I saw the document, I would have no reason to doubt you.
Okay.
If that's what you say, it is.
Did you have a second meeting with Judge Hazelwood after the case was dismissed?
We may have had a meeting for another meeting before the case was dismissed or after. I don't recall.
Did you have any meetings with Judge Hazelwood concerning the case after you went to the Attorney General's office with Mr. Griesbach?
I don't recall. We may have.
Do you recall at any time talking with Judge Hazelwood about the information that you had found out from Mr. Bergner about Gregory Allen?
I don't recall.
At any time that after you received the call from the crime lab, did you have any discussions with Jim Bergner about the case? I'm sorry,
Jim
Bogert about the case.
Yes.
On how many occasions?
At least once.
In person or by phone?
By phone.
Who initiated the call?
I did.
Was it?
Judge Hazelwood suggested that I do that.
Was it before or after you got the dismissal or filed the papers for the dismissal in the case?
I believe it was before.
Any further conversations after the case was dismissed with Jim Bogert?
Not that I recall.
What do you recall the conversations that you had with him?
I called him up to let him know what was going on, what we were intending to do. I recall him being emotional. I don't recall what he said.
Emotional? In what sense?
He was emotional.
I know. Was he happy? Was he sad? Was he angry? What were his emotions that you experienced with when you...
I can't get into his head other than he was very emotional during the phone call. I didn't sense anger.
Was he happy?
He seemed to be happy from what I could tell from his emotion, yes.
Did he say anything about Stephen Avery?
Not that I recall.
Did he ask you any questions about Gregory Allen?
Not that I recall.
Did he make any statements to you about whether or not information concerning Gregory Allen had been provided to him when he was representing Stephen Avery?
He did not say anything like that.
Do you recall any further discussions you had with Jim Bogert after that one concerning the Stephen Avery matter?
I don't recall.
Did you know Bogert previously as a result of having done criminal defense work?
Yes, and he married my wife and I.
Okay, so he's a friend of yours.
He's not a friend. He married us. He's a friend of my in-laws, actually.
Okay. At any time after you received the information that you received from the crime lab, did you have any conversations with Richard Bray, Brey, about the...
Are you referring to Bry, Brigh? Or,
is that how it's pronounced, Bray?
I would say Bray since that's in parentheses.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were actually asking me. Is that yes.
About the Stephen Avery case?
Not that I recall.
After September 3, when you got the information, from the crime lab, did you ever talk to Tom Bernstein?
No. Excuse me. No. May I have some water, please?
From Mr. McCambridge, sure. Mr. Kelly, that's all I have.
Oh.
Mr. McCambridge, okay. The reporter, anything for the record, gentlemen? Mr. Covelli, nothing further. Mr. Bascom, nothing. Reporter, then being nothing further, the deposition is concluded at 11:11 a.m. off the record.
Wow.
Yeah.
11:11's powerful in numerology.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so before we move on to Mr. Griesbach, I don't want to preclude anything at all here, but before we move on to that one, I want to open it up for any discussions, thoughts, concerns, whatever. Raise hell, mad, I don't care, whatever.
Can I just say, could you imagine it being made public at about this time that Gregory Allen had been linked to yet another sexual assault that had occurred while Stephen Avery was in prison for a crime he committed in Manitowoc County?
Say
a
that.
crime that Stephen committed. What are you saying?
Did I say that wrong? So now think about this. They're slowly showing that Stephen Avery never should have been in prison, right? Everyone that they're putting forward, these depositions are showing that it's pretty clear that no one really thought Stephen was guilty of this crime to begin with, that Gregory Allen was. Many people had told many people Gregory Allen did this crime, not Stephen Avery. Now, what date was Rohrer's deposition? Wasn't it in August, I think?
I think the second one was September. Hold on. Yeah.
Okay. So
11/11. Oh no, that's when it ended.
On the 22nd. On
22nd.
the 22nd.
Thank you, Doc.
okay.
That's part two.
So the DNA match to the Minnesota assault was made in August. If that would have made the media while these depositions were slowly being slowly showing that Manitowoc County not only intentionally convicted him, they intentionally let him sit, and Gregory Allen's out committing heinous crimes, it just would have been devastating. The civil suits it just would have been.
Yeah.
They had to make these go away. They had to. They just had to make the civil suit stop. They had to make Stephen Avery a really bad man. They just had to. And I just wonder if Glenn and Kelly weren't trying to get to the point of showing that Peg L and the DOJ knew all of this and whitewashed it anyway. I don't know if they were trying to show that Manitowoc hid it from them, or if that the DOJ knew about it and just omitted it. You have to wonder,
I don't think Glenn and Kelly knew at all. I think if they had known of anything about the Minnesota case, we'd have heard about it. I don't think that. I just don't see them as the type of lawyers to have withheld anything to have gotten the lid off. I really don't.
Yeah, when I talked to him on the phone, Jax, he didn't sound surprised.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he probably wasn't surprised because I'm sure they had done their due diligence and they knew what kind of person Allen was. The guy's a monster. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
If he gets out, I mean, even at his age, I'm telling you, he was born. He was born in ¡54, so that makes him 76. So he'll be 77 this year.
No. 67.
If he was born in 50, I'm sorry, 67. My bad. I added 10 years to that. But even at 67, to me, I still foresee him as being a danger to any female around.
Yes.
I spent all day on the phone tracking the places he was at, looking for, submitting FOIAs, trying to ascertain if there are more victims out there, with the hope that if there is, that there's forensic evidence that can link him to a crime.
Yeah, it had to be murder because statute of limitations probably is being.
No, not all of them. Not all of them. A lot of states were already progressive about sexual assaults and keeping them open. So, a lot of people started changing their legislation in the mid 80s. And so
we could only hope, right?
Yeah. So hopefully, I'm not hoping for more victims at all, but if there are more victims, I'm hoping there's evidence. We can link him to it, and we can make sure the man never sets foot out of prison.
Well, I mean, I'm like you. I damn well think there are more victims that they never made the link to.
There's got to be. There were 10 years. There has got to be a bunch.
And the guy traveled. I mean, look how much he traveled.
I mean, he was obsessed.
Yeah,
he was obsessed.
And he was compulsive.
Yeah.
But but he also targeted as well. He would follow.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Oh yeah, he knew their phone numbers. He would call them afterward. I mean,
Yeah. Doc?
some of these departments don't want anything to do with it. But some of them have people who are curious and they're willing to go and look. So
Yeah.
we'll see. You know,
Yeah.
we
Doc?
shall see.
You got something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with what Sunshine Christina said about the recent case involving Gregory Allen, how they had to keep that out of the public. Because you think about it, right? You know, we've all been looking about the incredible timing of the disappearance of Teresa Halbach, right? So you could imagine that if the information in the depositions was made public, was publicly available at the time that depositions were going, if the information about Gregory Allen and his past criminal history was made known during the deposition times, could you imagine the public's response when the MTSO, the very same people that put him in prison in 1985, are then pointing fingers at Stephen Avery and saying, "Oh, you killed Teresa Halbach."
Yeah.
The whole equilibrium, I'm telling you right now, 99.99% of the citizens are saying, you're pulling a Swifty, you're pulling a fast one, just like you did in 1985. No one would believe that Stephen Avery, with all this that was occurring at the time, right? And don't forget, Stephen Avery and Jody Stokowski, they sat in on some of the depositions. Stephen Avery was listening to all the crap that Rohrer was talking about, right?
That's right.
Are you now going to try and tell me that before the big fish were about to be hooked, Stephen Avery goes and kills a girl, a woman, for no reason at all?
No way.
Right? And so we can look back because we've got hindsight, but could you imagine what the press coverage would have been like had they been covering those depositions, putting this information out on the public, and like Sunshine Christina said, oh, look at Mr. Allen, he was accused of this, we found his DNA there, all at the same time. It would have made it very, very difficult to point the finger at Stephen. Everyone in the community would have said, you're setting him up again.
Well, if we think about Doc, Sunshine brought up these dates. As I recall the documents, the judge in Minnesota signed the warrant in May of 2005, early May. The proper warrant, the actual document, was prepared, and I can't remember the date, but it was right around this date in September of 2005, the actual warrant itself from the state. Of course, we know we didn't get served for another 2 years and 3 months. But nonetheless, I just can't imagine the media storm and how badly that would have blown up if that would have happened during these depositions. Oh my God, it would have blown up.
I was going to say, if the media got their hands on that information, I mean, they would have ran with it because that's juicy. That's
salacious.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is this, guys. Who was privy to all the knowledge and all the information as it was going on in the depositions? And the answer is Stephen Avery. Because he sat there for most of the depositions. He knew what was going on. And Kelly and Glynn would have been giving feedback to Stephen to say, look, we've done this, they've said this, we've got all the reports. And that's why Stephen, from day one, immediately said, they're setting me up again. Now, people who weren't aware of what was going on were going, Stephen, you would say that, wouldn't you? Right? But with all this foreknowledge, with all the readings that you guys are doing and the information that we're garnishing, of course members of the MTSO had a massive motive to end the civil suit because of the potential domino effect. And boom, it happened.
A big enough reason to kill, in my opinion.
It's possible.
Unfortunately, that's looking very likely.
September 22nd of 2005 is when the arrest warrant was sworn out.
And what date is this deposition? It's the 22nd. And here's one more thought. And please, I don't want anybody to say that this is fact. This is me speculating here. But you think about the fact that I have no doubt that Peg knew about the warrant from the problems with Gregory Allen. I have no doubt she was made aware of it. I'm sure there was a phone call made to the authorities in Wisconsin. I'm talking about upper authorities and the Department of Justice and whatnot. I'm sure she was made aware of it. Do you think it's possible, because she was aware of it, that she passed that information on privately, of course, to a few other people about Gregory Allen, and then all of a sudden we've got this deposition, and Rohrer can't recall anything. He can barely even recall his name. I mean, it's just I hate to even make that connection without any proof, but that's sure what it looks like. I hate to say it, but
no, it's exactly what happened. There's no way that one state is working with another state without contacting the DOJ and the AG to do it, especially when it's a DOC inmate.
And it's a DNA match.
Yes, because they're going to call. They're going to call first. They're going to call to see why he's in the system. Then they're going to call the county that arrested him. Then they're going to call the DOJ because holy shit, it's in the paper. Gregory Allen this was all being discussed back then, right? So it's, in Minnesota and Wisconsin are right next to each other. It's farcical to think that the people, the powers to be, didn't know about this.
Oh, I'm sure they did. I have no doubt that they did. As to what conversations they may have had, that's pure speculation on my part, but I can see it happening. I mean, they're looking at protecting themselves because how many times did they mention liability?
Yeah.
Travis is in the audience. He probably can speak more to that. But they had a huge liability here.
Oh, yeah. And here's the thing. Before we knew about this Gregory Allen DNA match that had come up at that time, they had the only motive. They're the only ones that benefited from Teresa's disappearance. Before we knew about the Gregory Allen DNA match to yet another case that popped during the depositions. Now this just intensifies the motive for them, right? They had yet another reason.
Certainly potential.
To make the civil suit go away.
Yeah. Huge potential, or huge motive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Christina, that was a great find, I have to say.
Oh yeah, it's a huge find. People that really have followed the case and seen the inroads and this, it's really a massive backstory, any which way you look at it.
Yeah.
Has that been known prior? I didn't know about that until recently.
About the Minnesota case?
Yeah.
No, nobody knew about it.
No.
Okay.
We didn't.
I thought that was new.
It's new. In this DOJ file that Seeking Truth got, I mean, you can make, and at some point, I'm going to have to break it down because it's 650 pages. I'm going to have to break it down and try to do this section at a time and get it presented just so people can understand, again, this personality of Gregory Allen. The guy is just
well, maybe we could split it between, the new podcast that we're going to have on Wednesdays and this one and try and incorporate it all together, because I'm going to be tracking him or attempting to track him. I feel like a hunter. I'm tracking his footsteps, but it it appears like he was working on power lines. So he was going, I don't know if he was going where the storms were or if he was replacing power poles, but that's why he was traveling all over the eastern United States.
Yeah,
So,
he was all over the place, and then the Midwest too, as far
In
west as north.
California, was he not?
well, here's the thing. I have heard from more than one source that he did time in California for beating a store owner when he was caught robbing it with a baseball bat. But Susan, that crime is not listed in the file that we got from Seeking Truth, unless it was a crime that was committed as a juvenile and it's redacted. So
Possibly, don't know. I haven't heard that one before, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Okay, questions, comments, and I really haven't. I should have been looking at chat over here to see if there's anything that we need to address from people in chat. I see some chat going, but
check your DMs. I sent you that.
I would. That one's. I've got that copy too. I remember having that Imgur. I've got the actual PDF, and what I'll do, I'll link it. I'll put it in the description. So I'm sure others that have already seen it, but I can't hardly read that one. It's in the Imgur. It's really blurry. I remember seeing that, but
that's my Imgur. So maybe it's better. Have you checked it to see if it's any different than the other one? That's one I made off of someone else's.
Yeah, I've got the same one, but I've actually got the PDF file. I'm sure it's on my external drive, and I'm not going to plug it up. It probably would be fine, but I don't want to take a risk of making my computer say, "Hey, what are you doing here? We're doing a live." It probably.
I'm going to read what Kent 3334 says.
Please.
He says there was a woman missing from Shawano, Wisconsin bus stop, Highway 29. Runs east-west Green Bay through Shawano to Highway 94 to Minnesota. I don't know if it would match Allen not being in jail. November 2nd, 1998.
He was in jail. He was in jail.
Yeah,
he was in prison. Thank you for that comment, Kent. But yeah, he was already locked up by that time. But we know that there were others crimes that he committed. At least at minimum convicted of 2 rapes that we're aware of, one in Minnesota and then the other one that they got him for in Wisconsin. So, and then there was another assault, but I don't think he raped that woman. But then how many others they didn't link him to?
God only knows.
Yeah.
And then Jinx has told me about the Donna Emmel case. He's suspected in the murder of the 15-year-old girl in North Carolina.
Yeah. Okay. If there's no other comments or questions, let's we're moving on with time here, so let's get started with Mr. Griesbach and his deposition, which was also on September 22nd, 2005, same day as his part 2 of Rohrer's deposition. So, if we're ready to roll, Susan, are you good to go? We need to get a drink before we start. This one's about 60 pages, looks like.
About more or less the same as the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready, Jack.
So what we'll do?
You're
going to be the lawyer, and I'm going to be Griesbach.
Okay.
I'll read this first part, and then we'll get going. But we'll pause at least one time, if not twice during this, so we can take a break and get questions or whatever comments. Okay. So we're the number of lawyers that are also part of this. Okay. Let's see. Get to the lawyers down here. Kelly and Gavelli. He's on behalf of Dennis. Yeah, on behalf of Vogel and Manitowoc County. Mr. Bascom. He was in the prior one. Manitowoc County lawyer as well. Mr. Pollen, on another one on behalf of Kesork and Manitowoc County. And then a personal lawyer of Kesork, Mr. Mayer. And Mr. McCambridge, he's from the DOJ on behalf of Mr. Griesbach. And then Stephen was at this one, Jody wasn't at this one. So anyway, fire away.
Okay. Mr. Griesbach, would you tell me your date of birth and your age, please?
Sure. February 13th, 1961. I'm 44 years old.
Okay. And you're currently an assistant district attorney in the Manitowoc County DA's office?
That is correct.
Okay. How long have you been in the Manitowoc County DA's office?
I believe it would be 14 years, 1991 to now, so 14 years.
Okay. And I understand we had some testimony by Mark Rohrer just a little while ago that there was a brief period of time during which you were the district attorney of Manitowoc County?
It's kind of a complicated matter. I'd been elected as a district attorney in 2002 after running for election. I chose for basically personal reasons not to take the office. But in the intervening time between actually the primary election, which was in September of 2002, until January of 2003, which was when the new term was going to begin, I was still present in the form as was the former DA, Jim Fitzgerald.
Okay.
But the answer is basically no. I've not served as a district attorney in Manitowoc County.
Did you remain in office between January 03 and March of 03 when Mark Rohrer came on board?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I don't want to go into the personal reasons, but I do need to ask this. Did the personal reasons have anything to do with this case, with the Stephen Avery case?
Not at all.
Oh, okay. Fine. All right. So the period of time that you've served as an assistant district attorney in the Manitowoc County District Attorney's Office up until January 1 of 2003, your boss was Jim Fitzgerald?
That's right.
Okay. And then starting in March of 2003, your boss became Mark Rohrer?
Yes.
And he's still your boss?
Yes.
Okay. So then you were in the office during some of the post-conviction proceedings in the Stephen Avery case?
That would be right.
In particular, you were in office when Steve Glenn represented Stephen Avery in 1996 in an effort to secure his release on the basis of DNA evidence at that time.
In office in the sense that I worked there as an assistant DA.
Okay.
Right.
Let me ask you this. Did you have, in any of those proceedings, did you have any responsibilities yourself?
No.
Okay. In respect to the Stephen Avery conviction, during the period of time that you worked for Mr. Fitzgerald, did you ever discuss the case with him?
I may have once. I recall being present more or less as an observer during one of the post-conviction motions when Mr. Fitzgerald was appearing for the state. And I thought Mr. Glenn, but perhaps someone from Wisconsin Innocence Project was appearing for Mr. Avery. Nothing in depth in terms of a conversation at all.
We've had some testimony about the fact that in early September of 03, around September 3rd, Mark Rohrer received a telephone call from the crime lab concerning the analysis the crime lab had done and the fact that the crime lab had, by its analysis, determined that the person who had assaulted Penny Bjornston was Gregory Allen and not Stephen Avery.
Yes. Yes.
And you were informed of that by Mark Rohrer?
Yes.
Okay. Up until that moment, had you from any source any knowledge concerning Gregory Allen?
None.
Was it a new name to you when Rohrer told you about what he had been told by the crime lab?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Again, up until that time, you were serving in an office that included Brenda Peterson as the victim witness coordinator and Beverly Badker as a paralegal, right?
Yes.
Up until you heard from Rohrer about what he had heard from the crime lab, had you discussed Gregory Allen or Steve Avery with either Brenda Peterson or Bev Badker?
No.
Okay. Where'd you go to law school?
I went to Marquette U.
Okay. And when did you complete your studies at Marquette?
It would have been 1983 undergrad and then 86 law school.
Okay. Between 86 and 91, when you entered the DA's office, what did you do?
Working backwards, I guess, from Manitowoc, I was an assistant DA in Ozaki County from, I still remember the date, May 2nd of 1988 until I believe it was September of 1991. Prior to working as an assistant DA in Ozaki, I was in private practice for a couple of years. I guess that would be 2 years between law school and Ozaki as an attorney for a law firm by the name of Gagnon Law Office, which is located in Berlin, Wisconsin, west of Oshkosh.
Okay. When you were in private practice, did you do any criminal work?
A small amount.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you were a relative rookie in criminal law when you started at the Ozaki office?
That's very fair to say, yes.
Okay. All right. We've had an exhibit marked here today and discussed with 10, and it's exhibit 123. I'd ask you to take a moment and examine that.
Sure.
You're the author of that document?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And that recites, or let me ask you, what does that recite?
Well, it summarizes the afternoon when we received the information from the crime lab that they had a DNA specimen retested with the new technology and that specimen on the Avery file pointed to and came to be identified as Gregory Allen instead of Mr. Avery. This was relevant evidence on this assault.
Okay, go ahead.
The memo further is my note of what I observed in the Avery file. When we got the call from the crime lab, I and Mark retrieved the Avery file and looked through the file. And the memo recounts that within a couple of minutes, I did locate a criminal complaint alleging that Mr. Allen had committed a crime about a year prior to the assault in his case. And the police reports as well caught my attention because we had been told by the crime lab that the DNA specimen came back to Mr. Allen, Gregory Allen. So I retrieved that and I found it to be of interest.
When you say you retrieved the file, was it you or Rohrer or both of you who actually physically retrieved the file?
When I say retrieved, I should clarify. I actually meant the Allen complaint and the police reports from within the file. As far as retrieving the entire file, my recollection is that the file was in several boxes. I think the boxes were kept in the office of Mark in the district attorney's office himself, if I recall correctly. I'm not absolutely sure about that.
Okay. Do you know why? Well, strike that. Were you aware that there was this analysis going on at some time prior to September 3, or was it new news to you?
I was vaguely aware that that was being done, yes.
Was anybody in the office assigned to that case at that time?
No.
Do you know how it came to be that the Avery file in September of 2003 was in Rohr's office? How it had gotten there, where it had been obtained from? Mr. Mayor, object is multiple form, Mr. Kelly. You're right. I'll withdraw I'll just ask you, do you know where it came from and how it got there?
I believe it was there from when Mr. Fitzgerald was there and that it had just still there. It was just still there. It was not an active file in the sense that Mr. Rohrer had been looking at it or I or anyone else in our office.
Okay. After Mr. Rohrer got the information that he did from the crime lab and spoke with you about it, did you make any effort to track down any further information concerning Gregory Allen?
I think he did. I think we looked into whether he had previously been charged in Manitowoc County or any other county. I think we looked at CCAP and in an effort to see whether he had been charged or convicted of previous crimes.
And what did you find?
Well, I do recall finding that he had been convicted of the crime alleged in the criminal complaint that was in the Avery file approximately a year earlier. I did note that the district attorney at the time, Dennis Vogel, was also the prosecutor in that case and was present at the sentencing hearing on that case. I think I noted the disposition. I don't remember I don't recall exactly what it was at the time. My recollection, though, is that it was a fine. It was a lewd and lascivious charge, I believe, as a result, and the result was a fine, if I'm recalling correctly.
What were the underlying factual circumstances of that case, if you recall?
That Mr. Allen had been on a beach fairly close to where the Bernstein assault, the victim's assault in this case, took place, and that it involved a different woman approximately a year prior to the assault in question here. That the victim alleged that a man was chasing her. I believe that he had dropped his shorts or something to that effect and had attempted to grab her while she was on the beach, I believe walking.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of whether or not the documents, police reports and or charging documents, whatever documents you found when you first went into the Avery file and found these documents about Gregory Allen, do you recall whether any of those documents had any identifying stamp on them, indicating that they had been provided by anybody to the State Public Defender's Office?
I recall specifically that they did not have such a stamp.
Okay. I understand this from Mark Rohrer's testimony this morning, but I'll ask you about it. At some point, as I understand it, you and he obtained from the Sheriff's Department a record of Gregory Allen's criminal records?
Yes.
Can you tell me how that came about?
I believe we went to the dispatch center at the Sheriff's Department and asked them to run a record check of Mr. Allen. The concern was, where was Mr. Allen now?
And what did you find out from that record check?
That he had been convicted in a Brown County case, I believe it was in 1995, and was serving a prison term as a result of that conviction. That conviction was also a type of assault charge, I believe, an entry into the home in Brown County.
Do you have any recollection about how proximate in time it was that you went to the dispatch center and got that information as compared with when you received the information from the crime lab?
A couple of days.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that you and Mark Rohrer were looking at the time for whatever information you could find about Gregory Allen's criminal record?
Among other things.
You want to enlarge on that, what the other things were?
Well, we were looking primarily into the information that would confirm that indeed Mr. Allen committed this crime back in 1985 and not Mr. Avery. We wanted to be certain before we stipulated and agreed with the Innocence Project that Mr. Avery did not commit this crime and that Mr. Allen did.
And at some point, your search satisfied you in that respect?
Yes.
Okay. I want to back up a little bit to what happened immediately after you received the information from Mr. Rohrer that's indicated in Exhibit 123 and that you've told us about. And I'm going to ask you this question with reference to you yourself, and not you and Mr. Rohrer. To whom did you next speak about what had been the information that you had received from Mr. Rohrer that he in turn had received from the crime lab? To whom did you next speak about that?
Oh, I don't recall.
Okay. At some point you spoke with Brenda Peterson and Beverly Badker about this? Mr. Cabelli. Objection to form. Mr. Kelly. Did you?
I'm not so sure about that. I don't believe I did. If I did, it was during a conversation with other people present, a general conversation. I'm relatively certain that I did not individually speak with either of them at any time since this.
All right. Do you have a recollection of this sort of general gathering that you're talking about? What occasioned that?
Vague as far as the recollection. What occasioned it, nothing specific. And in terms of the timing, probably as, weeks or at most a month went on. It wasn't a particularly meaningful conversation, I guess, from my standpoint, anyhow.
At some point, did Mr. Rohrer make an announcement to people in the office about what he had found out from the crime lab?
He probably did.
All right. And you and he made a trip to the Attorney General's office in Madison at some time, relatively soon after you got the information from the crime lab.
Yes.
Okay. What was the reason for going to Madison?
Mr. Rohrer had decided that it would be appropriate to request the Attorney General to look at this in an independent sense. And we were taking the boxes, the 3 or 4 boxes that are part of this file, physically taking them to the Attorney General and also present ourselves for any questions that they had.
Why were you taking the boxes to the Attorney General?
I think at some point we felt that it would be the best way to handle this in terms of our office if there was to be any claim of improper conduct from the office, the district attorney's office back in 1985, that we not be the ones taking in the information or making any type of conclusion, since it is the same office through a different district attorney years later. I guess the legal thing is to avoid the appearance of impropriety.
And by the time you went to Madison, you had received information from people within the Manitowoc District Attorney's Office about the Stephen Avery matter and Gregory Allen. Is that correct? Mr. Mayor, form of the question by Mr. Kelly. You can answer.
I believe Mr. Rohrer had received some information from people within the office, and I, secondarily, perhaps through him, would have received that information.
And what was your understanding of what that information was? Mr. Cavelli. Objection. Form. Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think you're making him to speculate. Go ahead.
Okay. Only that Ms. Badker and Ms. Peterson had apparently expressed some concern to Mr. Bogle at that time that it wasn't Mr. Avery who was the assailant, but that it was indeed was Mr. Allen.
Back to Kelly. And this information that was provided by Ms. Badker and Ms. Peterson was information, as far as you know, that they provided to Mark Rohrer, and he then told you about?
I really don't have a clear recollection of exactly how I came to that, to understand that or to know that.
All right. But do you have a clear recollection that you knew it by the time that you were on your way to Madison?
I have a clear recollection that I knew it within a month of the DNA information coming back from the crime lab, whether it was before going to Madison or not. I don't know.
Okay. Well, let me show you something here. I'll ask you to take a moment with this. This is Exhibit 5 in these depositions, and it's a Department of Justice investigatory report. And I'll direct your attention. Take your time with the whole thing if you'd like, but I direct your attention in particular to the second to last and the third to last paragraphs on page 005614, which is the Bates stamp number.
I reviewed that.
Okay. May I see it for a moment? I'm going to read it into the record, paragraph by paragraph. Quote, soon after the mistake became public knowledge within the Manitowoc County Courthouse, the current district attorney, Mark Rohrer, started receiving information that people within the courthouse never believed these crimes were committed by Avery. These people all believed Allen committed the crime. Some of these individuals even stated to D.A. Rohrer that they made these concerns known to either the district attorney at the time, Dennis Vogel, or the Manitowoc County Sheriff, Tom Kasurik, unquote. Was that information that you and Mr. Rohrer provided to the Attorney General's office when you went to Madison? Mr. Cavelli. Objection. Form.
It sounds like Mr. Rohrer provided that information according to that person's account of what he provided to them. I have no reason to doubt that that's not the case.
Mr. Cavalli. Move to strike lack of foundation by Mr. Kelly. Were you present at the meeting when Mr. Rohrer provided this information to representatives of the Attorney General's office?
I was certainly present during the meeting that Mr. Rohrer provided the information he did to the AG's office. Now, whether I have a specific recollection of that piece, namely that those people in the office had expressed concerns to him that they had told officials at the time that it wasn't Mr. Avery, I don't know that for sure. I guess is all I'm saying. I believe that's probably the case.
Tell me your best recollection of what either you or Mr. Rohrer said to the people at the Attorney General's office about that subject. Mr. Mayor. Object. Compound.
My best recollection is that Mr. Rohrer probably did tell them. He was, I would say, the primary, being the district attorney, the person who led off the information that was given to the Attorney General's office. And I suppose my best recollection is that that it was stated specifically, especially given the fact that I reviewed what you have there.
By Mr. Kelly. Especially given the fact what?
That I reviewed what you've shown me in the terms of the AG's recollection.
All right. Do you remember whether Mr. Rohrer or you identified the people in the DA's office who had provided this information?
That was probably done.
And was it?
Mr. Rohrer, I would think.
Was it Ms. Peterson and Ms. Badker who were identified?
Again, my best recollection is that's correct.
All right. Were there other people included within this phrase, quote, people within the courthouse who never believed these crimes were committed by Avery, unquote, who were identified by you or Mr. Rohrer to the representatives of the Attorney General's office?
Whether it was at the time or later, I believe that Jill Mertens, former secretary in the district attorney's office during Mr. Vogel's administration, was probably mentioned, her name.
All right. Anybody else who was mentioned, to your knowledge?
Not that I recall.
How about the identification by Mr. Rohrer to representatives of the Attorney General of any persons within the Sheriff's Department?
I really don't recall.
Do you have any recollection of attending a meeting with Sheriff Peterson in his office in which the matter of the Avery prosecution and Gregory Allen was discussed?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me your best recollection of who was at that meeting?
I believe that was Deputy Inspector Beck was present, Mr. Rohrer, myself, Sheriff Peterson, and perhaps Deputy Inspector Mike Bushman. Not certain of that last one.
All right. Do you recall whether or not the county's council was there?
I don't believe that he was at that particular meeting.
Okay. Do you remember how it came to be that meeting was set up, Mr. Cavalli? Form.
I don't remember.
Back to Kelly. All right. Was it called for you? Was it called for by you and Mr. Rohrer?
I really don't know.
All right. Do you have any recollection about whether Sheriff Peterson produced any files and records concerning Stephen Avery and or Gregory Allen at that meeting?
He may have had the Allen information regarding the record checks and that we had requested from the dispatch earlier. Perhaps the photo array and the assault case in 1985.
What was the subject matter of the meeting?
I think the subject matter was basically a recognition that, that Mr. Allen was very likely the assailant here, that Mr. Avery was not, that there will be press inquiries regarding that it is, that is what it is, that we are confident in the DA's office that Mr. Avery should be released from prison as soon as possible. that there may have been, some discussion about the photo array, that we would like to see it, that Mr. Rohrer and I would like to see it, and that Sheriff Peterson thought we should look at it too, just to see how it was conducted. And I believe part of that book was Mr. Allen and whether he was in the photo array or not.
What'd you find out about that?
Mr. Allen was not in the photo array. His physical appearance and height and weight and such were pretty consistent with the victim's description of the assailant at the time.
Did you ever find out whether or not there was a booking photograph of Gregory Allen that was available on the evening of July 29, 1985, when Mrs. Bjornston had been attacked and the sheriff called for some photos to be brought over? Whether there was an actual booking photo of Gregory Allen from the 1983 offense that you've already told us about that was available?
My best recollection is that there was not a booking photo of Mr. Allen. I could be mistaken, but that's my best recollection.
When you say that, do you mean not available when you went to the meeting, or not available on the evening of July 29th?
I guess I mean when we were at the dispatch center. I don't know about whether what was or not was not available on the date of the original assault in 1985.
Do you have any recollection throughout the course of these events, since you found out about them on September 3rd, as to whether or not there was at one time a booking photograph of Gregory Allen that was made in connection with the 1983 offense that subsequently was either lost or destroyed or for some reason disposed of?
I have no information about that.
All right. Do you recall whether at the meeting there was any discussion about the matter of Gregory Allen as being identified in 1995 as having been Penny Bjornston's assailant? And then there was some discussion with Sheriff Kasurik about that.
If you could I think I lost you. Probably my losing you more than you're saying, but I lost it.
At the meeting that took place in Sheriff Peterson's office with the people that you've described to us, was there any discussion about the fact that it had come to light in 1995 from some source or sources that it was actually Gregory Allen who had attacked Mrs. Bjornston and not Stephen Avery? Mr. Bascom, objective form of that question.
I don't recall that information discussed at the time during that meeting. Might have been, might not have been.
Back to Kelly. Okay, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 124 and ask you if you'd take a moment and examine that.
Yeah, I've taken a look at it.
Okay, and first of all, is this a document that you've seen before today?
I think I have.
It's dated September 18th of 03. Doug Jones was an attorney in the DA's office at that time, right?
Still is, yes.
Oh, okay. A colleague of yours?
Yes.
And was this information that's in 124 made available to you at the time that this memo was prepared?
Yeah, I think by the time that memo was prepared, I was aware of the contents of that memo. My earlier, I guess, hesitation was I don't recall the contents of that memo was discussed at the meeting with Sheriff Peterson sometime earlier.
All right.
It may have been, may not have been.
Okay. Was any further investigation, to your knowledge, of the statements that are made in this memorandum about the information that was provided to Sheriff Kasurik and how he responded? Was there any further investigation of that by you or Mr. Rohrer as far as you know?
No, I don't know.
Okay. So was there any further discussion, to your knowledge, of the information that's stated in here about Mr. Allen by you or Mr. Rohrer with either Colburn or Lank?
There very well may have been. It was likely from Mr. Rohrer. I vaguely remember this topic. The contents of that memo was being discussed here and there over the following weeks. I was more of a receiver of information. I was not directing anybody to look into anything, but I do recall this same topic coming up once or twice more.
And what further information, if any, that you recall, did you receive about that?
My recollection is just that it was confirmed that indeed that Sheriff Kasork had said upon hearing that somebody else did this, that we've got the right guy and that he should not concern himself. My impression is that that was what people were saying was the case. I don't have personal knowledge that he said that, but...
Okay. And when you say, quote, what people were saying was the case, unquote, can you identify the people that you're talking about?
I believe it would be Officer Colburn, and he's the only one that I can say with any level of certainty that confirmed that. Now, you know, what one reads into, quote, I think we have the right guy, close quote, is another story. I'm not speaking to that issue, but as far as having been allegedly said by Sheriff Kasork, that is my understanding of Deputy Colburn's recollection of what was said.
All right. And do you have any understanding of what Mr. Link says about that?
I don't.
Okay. And who was your source of information as to what Colburn was saying?
Probably Mark, Mr. Rohrer.
All right. To your knowledge, was the information concerning what Colburn said and how Kasork responded provided by Rohrer to the Attorney General's office?
I believe it probably was.
And what's the basis for that belief?
Just from the general way in which Mark, the district attorney, and for whatever reason, for whatever it's worth, were handling this case. All information we had was provided to the Attorney General.
To your knowledge, did Mark Rohrer make any notes of any of the interviews he had with Brenda Peters or Beverly Badker or Colburn or Sheriff Peterson?
I don't know whether he did or not.
Did you?
No.
Is there some reason you didn't? Mr. Cavelli. Well, objection. He didn't. Lack of foundation. He never said he interviewed these people. Mr. Kelly. You can answer.
I don't. I didn't make any notes of whatever conversations I heard. My main focus was on whether or not Mr. Avery should be released and quickly. And after that, I think I memoed up a few things. A call from Mr. Bogle that I'm sure you're aware of.
I am.
There's some conversations that I think that I had with Penny Bernstein, the alleged victim, and I think with Janine Geske as well. But I did not memo up much in the office. Frankly, there wasn't a lot discussed in the office about this case early on. And Mr. Rohrer and I were very busy dealing with this case as well as the usual caseload in the DA's office.
Do you believe that you turned over to the to the Attorney General's office the information that you received from the dispatcher's office at the Sheriff's Department about Gregory Allen's record?
I don't know. If we didn't, it was because we didn't feel that it was the focus. The focus of that portion of us in checking Mr. Allen's records were to ensure that Mr. Avery was not the guilty party here. And the sending the file to the Attorney General's office and asking for their assistance did not deal with that issue. We had already convinced ourselves that Mr. Avery was not guilty of this crime.
Well, but you had broader concerns than that as well, right? You had questions respecting the fact that Stephen Avery, having been exonerated and Gregory Allen having been inculpated, as to what Gregory Allen may have done to other persons subsequent to July 30th of 1985. Mr. Cavelli. Objection to form by Mr. Kelly. And whether or not you would be prosecuting with respect to anything further and Gregory Allen.
Certainly with respect to whether we'd be prosecuting Mr. Allen for this assault in 1985. I remember feeling when we found out that he was in prison in Brown County for a very lengthy period of time, 30 years or something, that I remember feeling relieved and glad that he was in prison and had no other information other that he was responsible for other crimes other than this 1985 assault.
1985 or 1995?
1985 assault.
Well, certainly he was guilty of the 1995 assault, right?
In Brown County?
Yeah.
Yes, I was relieved that that was the case, but we didn't have to do anything about that case. It had already been prosecuted and he was sentenced.
But you had to make a decision about whether or not to prosecute him for the Penny Bernstein assault.
That's right.
And you had to look into the question of whether or not he might have assaulted other women than the 1995 victim and what, if anything, to do about that.
I had no information that he had assaulted anybody. Let me start that again. I had no information that he had assaulted anybody other than the 1995 victim and Penny Bernstein, and that he was on the beach a year prior to the Penny Bernstein assault and arguably attempted to assault a woman there, and at the least was involved in a lewd and lascivious behavior with her.
And you and Mr. Rohrer went to a meeting with Perry Kingsbury and Tom Bergner as part of your follow-up to the information that you had received from the crime lab.
Yes.
All right. And do you remember when that took place relative to when you had received the information from the crime lab?
Within a week, I would think.
Okay. And do you remember what occasioned that meeting? How it came about that you went to talk with those two gentlemen?
No, I don't.
Okay. Was that meeting initiated by you folks or initiated by them?
I really don't remember.
At the time you went to the meeting, did you have any knowledge whatsoever was with respect to the Stephen Avery? Let me start that over. At the time you went to the meeting, did you have any knowledge whatsoever of who Tom Bergner was with respect to the Stephen Avery Gregory Allen matter?
I knew Tom Bergner well, worked with him, and I think I understand your question. I believe that I knew that he had expressed doubt to Sheriff Kassark about the assailant as to whether Mr. Avery was the assailant, and in fact, that it could have been Mr. Allen.
And you knew that before you got to the meeting with Kingsbury and Bergner?
Probably in a real general way.
Okay. What was the source of your knowledge? I mean, I'm not talking now about what you find out in the meeting.
Right.
I'm talking about what you're carrying in your head into the meeting and what its source or sources were at the time, especially you recall.
I really don't recall. It's just a general, whether we heard from Chief Kingsbury or Detective Bergner through a phone conversation that I heard third or fourth hand. It was not a direct conversation that sticks out in my mind. What does stick out is what we were told at that meeting.
Okay, well, we'll get there.
Okay.
But whatever may be the chain of the 3 or 4 people, I guess all I can ask of you is whatever the source of your knowledge was, that general knowledge that you've described as you went into the meeting, from whom did it come to you? Specifically, was it Mark Rohrer?
I really don't know. If I knew about it, it was likely Mark.
Could it have been anybody else?
I don't know.
Well, let me suggest this to you. Had you spoken to Penny Bernstein by then?
I'm sure I had.
Had Penny Bernstein discussed with you information provided to her by Tom Bergner?
Yes, she did.
Okay. Tell me what you recall of that.
Again, the timing of all of this as to whether Penny and I spoke about this particular matter, what Tom Bergner matter, prior to my meeting with Chief Kingsbury and Detective Bergner. I don't know about the timing of that, but I do recall eventually speaking with Penny about the fact that Tom had expressed some concern to Sheriff Kassark, that in fact this sounded like Allen and not Avery.
Okay. Do you recall whether before you went to the meeting with Bergner and Kingsbury, you had had any conversations with Janine Geske about the Avery Allen matter?
I recall having a lot of conversations with both Miss Bernstein and Janine Geske, but the timing of it, again, I don't recall. I'm not very good with timing, frankly, but I believe I probably did speak with Janine early on before that meeting with Bergner and Kingsbury.
And whatever information that you've described as general that you may have had going into the meeting with Kingsbury and Bergner, had you discussed that with Mark Rohrer before you got into the meeting with Kingsbury and Bergner? Meaning, was he, as far as you know from you, carrying the same kind of general information? Mr. Cavalli, objection to form.
I really don't know.
Okay. You don't remember whether you had talked it over with him?
Right. I don't remember.
Do you remember whether you were informed before you went to the Kingsbury Bergner by Janine Geske about a phone that Penny Berenstain had received from somebody within the Manitowoc City Police Department, suggesting to Miss Bernstein that Stephen Avery may not have been the person who attacked her, and it may have been some other person?
I lost you.
Okay. I'm focusing on the period of time before you step inside the room with Kingsbury and Bergner. And I'm asking you whether you remember Janine Geske having spoken to you before that time and told you about Penny Berenstain having received a phone call from someone from the Manitowoc City Police Department saying that that person, and this is back in 1985, had been suggesting to Penny Berenstain that Stephen Avery wasn't her assailant. It was somebody else?
I don't remember talking with Janine exactly about that, or it's the quote, somebody from the police department calling Penny and telling her that, close quote, that I don't recall hearing that from Janine.
Okay. Do you recall at any time having heard that from Janine?
I recall speaking with Janine about the fact that Detective Bergner talked to Kosarik back in '85 about his belief that it may not have been Avery and it might have been Allen. Beyond that, in terms of detail about who told what and when, I can't help you.
Do you have any recollection at any time now of having spoken to Penny Berenstain in which she told you that somebody from the Manitowoc City Police Department had called her and said to her, "You may not have the right guy here"? Are you confident about this? And she in turn called Kosarik?
That sounds familiar.
Okay. Tell me what your best recollection is.
That Detective Bergner, I guess, was under the impression it was him, had informed Penny that it could have been this other person, and that Penny, being concerned to make sure she had the right person, talked to Kosarik about that.
And what did she say how Kosarik responded?
I have a hard time recalling exactly what he said, but my impression was that I really can't answer that without speculating or trying to remember something that I don't recall right now.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me your best recollection? Mr. Cavalli, objection, no foundation.
She didn't. I had the impression that the information she gave to Sheriff Kosarik was not acted upon or considered too seriously.
Do you have any recollection of Penny telling you that the way Kosarik responded to what she was telling him was actually quite similar to the way Kosarik is said by Colburn in Exhibit 124 to have responded, specifically, quote, "We've got the right guy. Don't concern yourself," unquote. Mr. Mayor, form of the question.
Something to that effect.
Okay, now I'd like to ask you what you indicated that you do recall, and that is what you found out at the meeting with Kingsbury and Kosarik concerning the Stephen Avery Gregory Allen. Mr. Cavalli, I think you misspoke.
Kingsbury and Bergner?
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
That's all right.
Let me rephrase it. Focusing on the meeting where you, Mr. went to talk with Kingsbury and Bergner. Tell me your best recollection of what was said by them at the meeting.
Tom Bergner told us that he recalls going to Sheriff Kasarek at the time of this assault, shortly after it, and telling the sheriff that he had this other fellow, Gregory Allen, under surveillance for a week or two prior to this assault, and that it seemed to fit his MO, that he expressed real reservation about whether it was Mr. Avery that did this, and that they really need to look at Mr. Allen.
And did Bergner go on and tell you how the sheriff responded to him?
I believe he did.
And what did he say?
I don't remember what he said, but Detective Bergner, and again, I wasn't there obviously during the conversation between Detective Bergner and Sheriff Kasarek, but Detective Bergner, the impression I had was that the sheriff didn't really want to go into that information. I believe that he had the right person, that Mr. Avery was the assailant.
You said earlier in your testimony today that you know Tom Bergner.
Yes.
And I had the sense that you know him professionally.
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that you know him well?
Yeah.
And that you've worked with him over the years?
Yes.
And what do you think of him professionally? Do you have an opinion concerning his reputation and concerning your own thoughts about him?
Yes, he is.
Mr. Mayor, form and relevance. You can answer.
His reputation, I believe, is that he's a good cop, an honest cop. And my working with him and my own working relationship with him was always, I have a lot of respect for Detective Bergner.
Okay. At the meeting that took place with Kingsbury and Bergner, were there any documents that they produced for you?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Were there any documents present?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall whether Bergner elaborated on who was surveillance of Gregory Allen? And when I say, quote, who was involved, unquote, I mean within the city of
Right.
Manitowoc Police Department.
I don't. It may have been detectives. It may have been Bergner. He was a detective at the time, and then he was captain when we met with him in 2003. It might have been one of the other detectives. I don't know.
Okay. Did he by chance, I shouldn't put it that way, did he by any means describe to you whether the decision on his part to Kasura was a decision he made completely on his own, or was it something that had, and perhaps even his superior in the city department before he went to see Kasura?
I had the impression that it was Tom Bergner himself.
Okay, all right. Did Kingsbury offer any thoughts of his own? Strike that. Was Perry Kingsbury the chief of the city department at the time that you interviewed him and Bergner?
Yeah, that we were present together. We didn't really interview him, but yes, he was police chief at that time.
Okay. Did he have any thoughts of his own to offer about what Bergner was telling you?
Not really.
Okay. Can you fix this in time? The meeting that you have with Bergner and Kingsbury relative to the information that you received on or about September 3rd from Mark Rohrer after he had spoken with the people at the crime lab?
I believe it would have been anywhere from a day after or 2 to 3 days after. So September 4th, 5th, or 6th, somewhere around there, certainly before we went to the AG's office.
Okay. And when you went to the AG's office, to your recollection, did you or Rohrer inform the AG's office about what Bergner had told you?
I don't recall, probably, but I don't recall for certain. Let's pause right here. We're more than halfway through, so let's pause here at line 10 and open it up for discussion.
Yeah.
Whew.
Well, he's much more forthcoming than Rohrer was.
Yeah, then I don't recall.
Yeah.
Well, in a way,
Yeah, he's
if-
saying it in a different way. I agree.
well, he's also covering himself as well, because if you read his book, The Innocent Killer, he has no hassles recollecting all the facts and figures and people's names, etc., etc. He basically was everywhere, right? And again, the important point here is the key. They're doing two things, right? One, they're establishing a chronology of events, right? Who said what to who and when, and the important link-up person is Tom Bergner, because what they're trying to establish is when was this information about Gregory Allen known, who knew about it, and what they did.
Yeah, and then it all ties in. I mean, now we have we've got a larger circle. We not only have the girls in the office, ladies in the office. We have the Manitowoc City Police, and now we also have the AG's office.
Correct.
I mean, can you imagine, Doc? Can you imagine, well, everybody, this time bomb? I mean, it's hard to say who all in the AG's office knew about the Allen connection to Minnesota, but can you imagine they know they're sitting on a time bomb? They had to.
Yes, they had to. They essentially had to diffuse it as much as possible, because, like I said, all roads were going to lead to Pegel.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Being the Attorney General, all the major cases or events that are occurring within their own county and state or whatever pass through the offices of the Attorney General, right? So there's no way that Pegel wouldn't have been aware. There's no way that the Attorney Generals wouldn't have been aware. So the question is, how does this all connect together? And the whole purpose of what Kelly and Glynn were doing, they were establishing a clear chronology. Who had the information, when, and how they acted upon it.
Yep.
And that's why the depositions of Kosarik and Vogel were going to be critical, because they would have, Kelly and Glynn would have presented a chronology and said, right, this is what we've got so far. Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? They were toast.
They were toast.
Yes, they were. Did y'all notice how Kelly was he kept re-questioning about when? We know Allen had other victims while Stephen Avery was in prison, besides Penny Bernstein. Did you notice how he kept reiterating that for a moment?
Yeah, when that section there.
Yeah, they didn't look into it, did they?
No.
Yeah, it's almost like he was trying to trip him up to get him to get Griesbach. It's like he was toying with him. Like, I know you know, and I know you know I know.
Yeah, correct. You see, there's no doubt that Kelly and Glynn, they had all the chronology in front of them. They had all the main name. You think about it. How on earth can these two guys, the attorneys, be asking highly detailed, specific questions concerning specific individuals appearing or not appearing at highly specific meetings, handing over information to another individual? And the answer is they've got the documents, and likely Bergner and others told them exactly what had taken place. And in a way, Griesbach is trying to answer the questions as honestly as he could, because he knew he doesn't want to be a fall guy.
That's right.
Yep.
It's almost like they had somebody that was like an inside man that was telling on everything. And I wonder if after Teresa's disappearance, if that wasn't a kind of like a shot across the bow, like look, if y'all don't shut this down and go away, it's, you might be next kind of mentality going on here. I mean, I think Glenn and Kelly were genuinely concerned for Stephen's life when they couldn't find him that night that he was arrested. And I feel
Yes.
like they played keep away with him.
Oh,
on
they did.
purpose,
They did play keep away with him. There's no doubt about it.
Totally illegal. Yeah.
control, and who had all the power, and letting them know, do not think you are going to depose Tom Kusurik tomorrow.
Yeah, that was a huge mistake, in my opinion. They should have pushed forward. They had every right to put, because they only arrested Stephen on a gun charge. And what's really, really screwed up about all that, they issued Avery a gun license.
Yeah.
We've all seen the documents, and they had to trip over themselves 19 times backwards to correct that they shouldn't have done it, but they did do it. But beyond that, they knew, they had to know, I'm sure they knew that those guns belonged to Raleigh.
Oh yeah, they knew all of that. And they also, it's funny how they never volunteered that they had to file the paperwork to register him as a convicted felon, right? They don't
Right.
volunteer that class.
Oh, no.
Had to and submit paperwork to make him a felon, to then submit a warrant making him a felon in possession. So, because when he was exonerated, they released him and they didn't do the paperwork to process him out. And it's funny because if you bring that up on Reddit, those guilters, those maniacal guilters that stalk for certain topics, that's a topic they don't like to.
Oh, that's a hot button, Christina. You know that. Come on.
I learned it really quickly when I
Yeah.
mentioned it. People I hadn't seen post in months just like swarmed on me like buzzards, man.
Yep. Well, as much as I guess distrust Griesbach, it does sound like, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. It sounds like he's trying to answer honestly as best as he could without revealing too much of the cat.
He actually is saying, I don't recall quite a bit, but just not as blatantly.
Right.
He goes on to speak
yes.
afterwards, but he actually does say it quite often.
He's smarter than Rohrer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if he's playing the game, he's definitely smarter than he's playing the game, because Rohrer just comes off like he's lying. I mean, it's just straight how I see it. But anyway, any questions? I'm trying to scan through while I'm running my mouth here, trying to scan through to see if there's any questions. Has anyone seen any questions that come up? Christina, you've been kind of watching the chat here, I see, and Dr. Silkman. Anything we needed to discuss?
Well, Hugh Fisher just said, I'm catching up on this live. I'm about 25 minutes behind. To me, this sounds like Griesbach is trying to answer honestly, which doesn't mean he wasn't linked on later. And I think we kind of just covered that.
Yeah. I think that's probably a pretty true statement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, we've only got about 20 pages, I think, to finish up, and we get this turn back on and we get this finished.
Line 10.
Yeah, I had to get it turned back on there. Yeah, to pop in there just in a moment. Okay. Yep. Line 10.
Okey-doke. Okay. By the time that you met with Kingsbury and Bergner, had you already met with Ken Peterson?
I believe so.
Okay. Was Bergner discussed at all in the meeting that you had with Peterson?
I don't believe he was.
So you don't have any impression that what you heard from Bergner that you had with them was something that Ken Peterson was aware of?
I don't have an impression one way or the other.
All right. After you had the meeting with Bergner and Kingsbury, did you provide the information that you heard there? Any conversation? Did you provide the information to Janine Geske in any conversation you had with her?
Probably specific recollection, no, but probably.
Okay. Did you provide the information that was given to you by Bergner in any conversation you had with Penny Berenstain?
Again, probably.
Okay. Did you yourself have any conversations with Tom Bjornston after the September 3rd information that Rohrer told you that he had received from the crime lab?
I did.
One or more?
One or two at most.
Can you fix them approximately in time?
The first one is likely soon after we found out. One of my roles was to let Penny know that it happened, and to let Penny know of the new evidence that it appeared that Mr. Avery was not the assailant. And Tom, I think initially Tom answered the phone. I let him know before letting Penny know, is my recollection of how this worked out.
Well, that's a shit job to have.
Well, I'm telling you.
So this is very early on, after you crime lab?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion with Tom on that occasion that you recall?
No, I don't recall.
All right. And was there then a later conversation you had with Tom Bjornston?
I believe there was one other conversation.
Let me just go back to the first one for a moment. Do you recall anything further that Tom Bjornston said to you when you provided this information to him?
Not offhand, no.
All right. And what was the content of the second conversation?
It was...
With Tom Bjornston.
Right. Either Tom called me or I called Tom, and I don't recall exactly the purpose of the conversation. Perhaps it was when Mr. Avery was going to be released. It seems to me it was something along those lines. I'm sure there was some discussions at some point about how did this happen, meaning how did Mr. Avery get charged and convicted.
Did you respond to that at all? Tell him what your thoughts were about that?
I probably did in some way. I don't recall any.
Do you remember in substance what you said to him?
No.
Okay. How about Penny? Did you have such a conversation with her at any time?
Yes.
Tell me what you remember of that.
Well, initially my conversation with Penny was just about that Mr. Avery was found not to be her assailant and that Mr. Allen was. She was concerned that Mr. Allen was, in custody and that he was not out to commit other crimes for her own safety, I suppose. Was concerned whether or not we were going to be filing charges against Mr. Allen. And there was a discussion regarding how this case occurred in 1985 during some of those conversations.
Tell me what you remember of those discussions.
I know that Penny spoke about the identification procedure when she was up at the hospital, her best recollection regarding the composite drawing, and photo array, her best recollection regarding, well, that was primarily it.
Okay. Did you tell her at some point about what Bergner had told you?
Probably.
And what did she say?
Penny was upset that information did not appear to have been taken too seriously at the sheriff's department.
By Sheriff Kasurik?
Right.
Okay. At some point, Mr. Rohrer has told us, you and he met with Sheriff Kasurik.
I don't think that's correct. I don't recall meeting. In fact, I'm quite certain I did not meet with Sheriff Kasurik. I think Mark did.
And do you have any recollection of what Mark Rohrer told you had been his conversation with Sheriff Kasurik about what he, Mark Rohrer, had found out?
Nothing that's even close to a definite recollection. I'd be speculating.
Or in other words, I don't recall.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or I'd be drawing upon a faulty memory.
Vogel called you at some point.
Oh, yes.
When was it relative to when you were informed on or about September 3rd by Rohrer of what the crime lab had said to you? About how approximate in time was it to that?
At most a week, I believe.
Okay. Tell me everything you remember. What transpired in that call?
He called me on a Friday, left a message on my voicemail. I was in court and didn't get back to him until... Actually, I did not get back to him. He called on Monday, the next Monday, before I had a chance to get back to him. I don't recall if he already knew. He must have known. I had no other reason to speak with him. That Mr. Avery was found not to have been the assailant here.
Okay, well, what did he want?
At some point, he asked me whether there was anything in the Avery file with regard to Mr. Allen.
And what did you tell him?
I told him that I did find that in the Avery file a copy of the criminal complaint filed against Mr. Allen regarding the incident a year prior to this assault, and a copy of the police report involved in that incident as well.
And what did he say?
I believe he asked whether there was anything else in the file with regard to Mr. Allen.
And what'd you tell him?
I didn't tell Mr. Vogel much. In fact, as I'm thinking of this, I'm not even sure that I told him that I located the Allen complaint in the file. I more or less listened to what Mr. Vogel said and did not say a lot in return. We changed that story right quick.
Were you bothered by the Vogel call?
Not necessarily. No, I don't recall. I also recall that Judge Hazelwood, in this case, who signed the order releasing Mr. Avery, suggested, I think, to me, that maybe it would be a good idea to let Mr. Vogel know before the media hears about this, just as a courtesy, a professional courtesy. I'm not sure, as we sit here today, that I didn't place the first call to Mr. Vogel and that he was calling me back on his second callback. I spoke with him.
Well, that's not what Griesbach says in his book. He says he found that in the file.
Right.
Was flabbergasted.
That's right.
Basically. Okay, sorry.
It's all right.
But whatever the sequence was, as far as you recall, there was only one actual conversation between the two of you?
Yes.
And that's a conversation about which you made a memorandum?
Yes.
And do you recall whether that's a conversation that you discussed at any time with Janine Geske?
I'm sure I did.
Do you remember what you told her?
I don't think I was bothered to go back to your earlier question by the fact that he called me. I was, and I told Janine that I was bothered by the sort of the tone and the tone of the conversation.
Were you finished?
Yeah.
Did you explain to Janine what you meant by that? What was it about the tone that was bothersome to you?
I thought it was a bit nonchalant for just then. I believe for me, in fact, I know for me, Mr. Vogel's first learning that the person he prosecuted and convicted of this assault, who had spent years in prison, was not in fact the assaulter, the assailant. I don't know Mr. Vogel, but again, if it were me, I would have reacted differently.
Do you recall at any time telling Janine Geske that you thought that Vogel's behavior in the case should be looked into, especially with respect to what you had found out from Bergner?
I probably did.
Okay.
If I can add, I'm sorry, but...
Go ahead.
The primary concern, or one of the other concerns I had in this file, was whether or not the criminal complaint against Mr. Allen and the police reports with regard to Mr. Allen from the incident a year earlier, both of which were in the Avery file, whether those things were turned over to the defense as part of the discovery. This is one of my primary concerns throughout.
And did you find out whether or not they were? Mr. Cavelli. Objection. No foundation.
I did not personally. My understanding is that the Attorney General concluded that they were, that's their belief.
By Mr. Kelly. Other than what the Attorney General's belief was, did you find out from any other source whether or not the information that you found in the file had been turned over to the defense?
None.
Do you believe it should have been?
Absolutely.
Why?
We have a duty as prosecutors to turn over any information that may be exculpatory to the other side. And I viewed this as potentially exculpatory, as there may be another suspect involved here.
Did you, Mr. Cavelli? I'll object to no foundation. This person has not been identified as an expert witness. By Mr. Kelly. Did you ever make a determination? We'll strike that. Did you look at all? Did you look at all into the question whether that Bergner provided to Kasurik concerning Gregory Allen was in turn provided by Kasurik to Vogel?
I did not.
Do you know whether or not Rohrer looked into that at all?
I don't.
Do you know whether or not Rohrer discussed that with Kasurik when he met with him?
I don't.
Do you recall whether you discussed with Janine Geske whether the information that Bergner provided to Kasurik was something that was discussed by Kasurik with Vogel? Mr. Mayor, object to form. Mr. Cavelli. Could I hear the question again? I'm sorry. Mr. Kelly. Sure, I'll ask it again. Do you recall whether you discussed with Janine Geske the question of whether what Bergner had told Kasurik was something that Kasurik in turn discussed with Vogel?
I don't recall.
Okay. In the period of time between when you received the information from Mark about what he had heard from the crime lab, which is on September 3rd of 2003, and when you went to see the people in Madison in the Justice Department, do you have any recollection of talking with Rohrer about the exposure of Manitowoc County, the sheriff, the DA in a civil lawsuit by Stephen Avery for damage?
I do not recall any such conversation.
Okay. At any time after you received the information from Rohrer that he in turn had received from the crime lab, have you ever discussed this case, Stephen Avery, Greg Allen, with Jim Wiss of the city of Manitowoc?
I don't believe I have.
With any other city of Manitowoc representatives?
Other than Berg.
Other than Kingsbury and Bergner?
Okay, no, I don't believe I have.
Since the time that you received the information from Rohrer that he in turn received from the crime lab, have you discussed this case with Jim Bogert at all?
No, I wanted to.
I was going to say it looks like you have some regret about that. At any time, have you discussed the case with Risa Evans?
No.
Oh, yeah. Since the time that you received the information that you did from Mark Rohrer about the crime lab's findings, have you had any discussions with Jim Fitzgerald about the case?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. With Thelma Anderson about the case?
I don't believe so.
Do you remember whether Elma Anderson was in the office at the time of the Stephen Avery prosecution?
I believe she was in...
Mr. Cavelli. Well, I'm going to object. No foundation. Excuse me.
I believe she was not.
By Mr. Kelly. She left sometime before that.
Right.
Do you know where she went?
She eventually went to the Kanawha County DA's office as an assistant DA, and I believe there was a short period of time when she was in private practice with, I think, Dwayne Law Firm here in Manitowoc, Dewane.
And that was after she left the DA's office and before she went to Kanawha County?
I believe that's correct.
Do you know why she left the DA's office?
I don't. Well, she ran against Mr. Vogel in a contested election. I don't know the exact timing with regard to when she left in that election.
That's it. Gentlemen, there being nothing further for the record, Mr. Cavelli, no. Reporter, I beg your pardon? Off the record for a moment, please. Reporter, back on the record. Mr. Cavelli? By Mr. Cavelli. Just a couple of follow-up questions. You had indicated at a time that you had a meeting with Sheriff Peterson that the descriptions of Allen and Avery were similar. Do you remember testifying about that subject?
Somewhat similar.
Okay. If I understood it, you may have seen a photograph from the photo array of Mr. Avery dating back to roughly 1985. Is that correct?
Yes.
But you did not see any photograph of Mr. Allen dating back to that point in time. Is that correct?
I think I eventually did.
Okay, but not at the time of that meeting.
Right.
Okay. Were Mr. Avery and Mr. Allen the same height?
No,
Were they close to the same height?
not really. I think there was 5 or 6 inches different.
Were they the same weight?
No,
Okay. Did they have were their hairlines the same? Did one have a receding hairline? One have a full head of hair? Do you remember?
I really don't remember.
Mr. Cavelli. All right, that's all I have. Mr. Kelly. Anybody else? I have a follow-up here. Examination by Mr. Kelly. Mr. Griesbach, you said in response to one of Mr. Cavelli's questions that eventually you did see a photo of Allen dating back to the time.
Yes.
When did that happen, and what did you see?
I believe that, whether it was a dispatch or someone eventually, and I don't remember how long after this, obtained a photo of Mr. Allen, and what I saw was a person who looked like Mr. Avery, but that was either taller or shorter. I don't remember right now the physical characteristics, but there was that's what stuck out in my mind, the height difference.
Can we pause just for 1 second, please?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So while we're paused, is there any comments, questions? Dr. Silkman, Jeff, Christina?
TTM Fangirl was asking what made Griesbach go to the other side. And I put my theory in the chat, so why don't y'all share yours?
I'll let Dr. Silkman tackle that.
My theory is that he's pursuing monetary gains, and a bit of fame, and also to give the impression that he had done nothing wrong, right?
That he was a good guy, yeah.
That he was a good guy. He tried to do the very best that he could. He tried to provide the information, unlike all the other individuals who had amnesia. But the other very important point that came up, I just about fell off my chair, was when he was asked about exculpatory evidence. And Mike Griesbach goes, absolutely, you needed to give that information to the defense at the time, right, regarding Gregory Allen. Well, I hope we read Tom Fallon's deposition, because that very point comes up, and oh my God, the bullshit that flies out of Fallon's mouth, you will not believe.
Yep, it's quite shocking, actually. You make a good point there.
It really is.
I completely suspect that somebody in Vogel's office stuck that Gregory Allen file in Stephen's file for later exposure.
It wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't Brenda Peterson.
Uh-huh.
Or Bad Badker. Yeah. Very well.
Yeah. Because you damn well know it wasn't did it. Or Kasurik.
Well, if they did, if it was Vogel, he damn well forgot about it. He wouldn't have ever left that in there on purpose. It's also funny.
Although he did ask about it. Why did he ask Griesbach?
Well, that's exactly right. He did ask, and if there was anything else found in there, that I found that really curious.
Somebody sent him an anonymous heads up when Stephen was exonerated. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just funny that he pursued that.
Or maybe he thought he took all of the files on Gregory Allen with him, and when he heard that Stephen was exonerated, he went to check, and he realized it was missing. Yep, and he panicked because he realized somebody had gotten his office, gotten the file, and put it in there because they were pissed because of what he had done.
Yeah. Possible.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is that the impression you get, the strong impression you get, was that both Vogel and Kasurik were forewarned years ago. That's the whole essence.
That's right.
They were forewarned years ago, and they chose to ignore it, right? But what Kelly and Glynn are doing is exposing the corruption that took place. And it was a masterpiece, right? It's there, black and white. You cannot deny it. There's a paper trail, there's a paper trace, and there were critical people in the offices at various times. So that's why he was establishing the chronology. There's no doubt in my mind that whistleblowers came in, spoke to the civil attorneys and said, this is what happened. And that's how they based their questions to the various individuals. And all of a sudden, everyone blanked out. No one could remember a thing.
I'm surprised Rohrer remembered where he lived at. Who am I? It's terrible.
Correct.
It was absolutely
Correct.
terrible, Doc.
And the amazing thing is, who was on the Avery salvage yard on November the 5th?
Griesbach.
Mark Rohrer.
Yep.
You could imagine inside he probably would have had a smile from ear to ear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were so fortunate to get that bit of Rohr's deposition in, ma'am, and see the way the man was squirming and uncomfortable and lying his ass off.
Yeah, he knew the hammer was going to fall.
Oh,
And
yeah.
He's basically saying to the executioner, okay, give me my sentence. I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
He knew he got caught. It's like when a mother comes home and she's got two sons, right? And they both got chocolate all on their faces and on their fingers. And the mum goes, all right, who raided the cookie jar? And both boys point to each other. He did. Yeah,
his
correct.
collar gets tight and he has to loosen it around his neck.
Correct. He couldn't. But you see, the amazing thing was he's not ice cold like Kaseric or Peterson.
No.
Those guys have got ice running through their veins.
He's nervous as hell. Yeah.
Rohrer could not hold it in. He was gone. He was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, can I have a mulligan, please? It's terrible. All right, you ready to finish this up?
Yeah, where did we stop? I'm sorry.
Let's just start on 13. It's fine.
Okay. When you say someone got a photo of Allen, who was that?
I don't know.
How was it brought to your attention?
I don't know.
And you recall checking out the photo?
I recall seeing the photo at some point, but I recall more specifically checking out the relative heights of Mr. Allen and Mr. Avery early on in the case here.
Was it a lineup photo?
I think it was a mugshot.
Booking photo.
Yeah.
So, can you tell from a booking photo, which is basically a headshot, what the relative heights of...
That information, the relative height and weight, I'm drawing from some other information about Mr. Allen. I recall specifically, I don't know the source, but I recall specifically knowing the height and weight, or learning the height and weight of Mr. Allen versus the height and weight of Mr. Avery.
In the mugshot that you saw of Allen that dates back to the time in question, did he have a beard?
I don't recall.
As far as you know, the original composite drawing was withdrawn from evidence and is in the possession of Couchet. Is that right?
As far as I know, I've heard that Detective Couchet at some point had the original composite drawing in his residence.
And did he have a booking photograph along with it?
I don't know that.
Did you hear anything about that?
No.
That's all I have, Mr. Baskin. I have nothing, reporter. There being nothing further, Mr. Kelly, thank you. Witness.
Thank you.
Reporter, the deposition is concluded at 1:07 p.m. Off the record.
Excellent.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I would really like to get...
this is so interesting.
Yeah, I would really like to get this doc suggested. I would really like to get Fallon's read in, and I need to talk to Banana Man a little further about that before we can move forward.
I wonder if we can read it and just leave out a few sentences here and there.
I think that's probably the best approach. Yeah. Yeah, just skip some.
Few I don't recalls.
Probably easy enough to do. The common theme. Really appreciate you helping out with this, Susan. You've got
No problem. That was fun.
Oh yeah, you got such a great reading voice and insight. It's
thank you. You did fantastic too, Jack.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
It's very mesmerizing material. I don't know if I'm biased or addicted.
I agree.
No, it is. It is.
Yeah, but it is like even my husband for a good hour had the TV paused and was just like, did he really say I don't recall that many times? And I'm like, yes, babe, he did.
And that stuff is something would recall as a person in that position with that major of a thing going on. You're gonna recall that shit.
Absolutely. And Christina, you can tell your husband. I'm pretty sure that he said that in that one deposition 137 times.
Wow,
Jesus.
I think that's right.
And the thing of it is these are people who go to school to specifically be able to have explicit recall of cases at the drop of a pen, right?
And make notes.
That's how they make a living. If you do not have a good memory and the ability to recall, even without notes, the gist of meetings and the gist of testimony and the gist of interviews with officers, you're not going to be a great attorney because you have to be able to, build your case.
Yeah.
It's really no different than taking the fifth,
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same.
Yeah.
See, with those responses, you will be not fit for office. It's as simple as that, right?
That's right.
If you don't know what passes through your hands and passes through your office, you're not fit for office, right? It's as simple as that. But Mark Rohrer knew that he could potentially get a lot of people in trouble. And I think he knew that, and he was trying to diffuse the situation as much as possible. Yeah. And, people like Kelly must have been shaking their head going, how come you don't remember anything? And remember Judy Dvorak when she wrote all those disparaging remarks about Stephen Avery, the fact that he had to have a shower because he stunk and all this stuff.
It's not
and
my verbiage.
She goes, that's not my verbiage.
Yeah.
But madam, excuse me, you wrote this in a report.
Right.
My intention that, which goes to show the joke of this is that despite the overt nature of what they did, they still tried to deny it. And I'm telling you right now, Kacerik and Vogel both would have said, I don't know, more, or I can't recall, more than Mark Rohrer did.
Absolutely. To every fucking question.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah.
But if I could just finish up, sorry guys, I don't want to hold the microphone, but there was one key point there, and that is that Kelly kept on going back to the photograph. Mm-hmm. He's referring to the arrest photograph of Gregory Allen in 1983.
That's right.
You go find it. Try and find it.
I'll try.
Because you know what the buggers did? They replaced it with a 1987 photograph.
That's right.
We just updated the file. Now, if Penny Bernstein had seen the 1983 photo of Gregory Allen, which was pretty close to around the time frame, I'm pretty well convinced that she would have picked him immediately out. Now, here's the question. Did they deliberately not include that photo in the lineup?
Of course.
Oh, I think so.
There you go.
Of course.
There you go.
Didn't include the the mugshot of the man who actually committed the crime. We're trying to frame someone who didn't.
That's correct.
I mean, it's absurd. It's really absurd. But I mean,
Yes.
we have to keep reiterating that. You're right, Dr. Silkman.
Yes, and you see, the civil attorneys in front of a judge, they would have read out the shopping list of everything that the MTSO, Kacerik, and Vogel did wrong. And that would have destroyed them, because that information eventually would have become public. And could you imagine what the press would have done with all that information coming out? Oh my God. It would have destroyed their careers. So again, I say, these were desperate men.
Desperate.
I don't even know. I think Vogel and Kacerik very well may have faced criminal charges if everything would have played out the way that it should have.
Well, they damn well should have. Yeah.
I think it's likely that it may have helped to end qualified immunity.
Come on, it was just a miscommunication.
Yeah. Nobody's going to believe it. I mean, could you imagine Kelly questioning Vogel about having closed meetings with Allen while he's under indictment without the presence of an attorney on at least 5 occasions?
Yeah.
I mean, crazy. It's literally mind-boggling.
Yep. Jeff?
Correct. And
I'm sorry.
It all happened.
Jeff, you've been sitting quietly and taking it all in?
Yes, I have. In and out of consciousness. No, I'm just kidding. With all the I don't recalls, one of the points that we look at in the inverse, and one of the points that you pointed out through the readings, Jack and Susan, is when they're very quick to answer affirmative, is when it's something that's exculpatory for Kacerik or exculpatory for someone else. That did you talk to Kacerik about this? No, they're really. I remember that. Right? It's very important, because you don't remember anything, but whenever it comes to something like that, you have a lightning fast memory.
Immediate recall.
And those responses tell me as much as I don't recall 170 times. That's my comment.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Stuart Hodgson says they should be in prison. They gave a rapist a false alibi. No shit.
Oh yeah, that good point. That would have, and that's another thing. Could you imagine getting that on the record? Yeah. It's unbelievable that a state is so corrupt that they potentially may have either caused the death of another person or used the death and allowed yet another assailant go free just to get back at Stephen Avery. And they stole a kid's life. It's unbelievable. Yep. And what's more unbelievable is the mainstream media doesn't care.
No.
Well, in this, sorry, Jeff.
Okay. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, in this particular case, they had to up the ante, right? They had to really up the ante and make sure Stephen Avery couldn't wiggle himself out of this, right? Because he was well represented by attorneys at that stage, right? The civil depositions were well underway. What's the only thing that can halt the depositions? Him being charged with murder, a crime, a serious crime. And you think to yourself, this is truly remarkable. So the question is this, right? Look at the timing. Now Stephen Avery sat for most of those depositions. Is he suddenly going to say, let me just kill someone for the sake of it. Yeah, why not?
I'm
Or
bored.
is he gonna just wait and go, oh boy, next week we have Kaseric and I'm gonna eyeball him throughout the entire deposition. I'm gonna look at him throughout the entire deposition and Vogel. Or is he gonna say, no, sorry, boys, I'm gonna let everybody off the hook. I'm gonna kill this beautiful woman. She's done nothing to me, but hey, I'm gonna restrain her, rape her, dismember her, cremate her, spread her cremains over different geolocations, and my nephew's going to help me.
And leave her car on the property.
And their key in
now, you got to, as Ken Kratz said, you got to believe, something horrible and nefarious took place. Either Stephen Avery completely lost his mind and somehow was a guru and was able to clean up all the nasty forensic evidence, except to leave behind clues that a high school student could follow, or something nefarious happened involving Kaseric.
Yeah.
And Vogel. And you look at their records. Have a look at their records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, and honestly, after reading Dvorak's deposition again, I could almost see like a powwow between, because Dvorak had falsified those police reports, right? Because she had made up the Marcel telling her that her mother-in-law had seen Stephen Avery in Marionette County when that 11-year-old little girl was assaulted. Well, come to find out, I mean, Ramona Marcel just vehemently and repeatedly denies ever having a conversation with her mother-in-law and ever telling Dvorak that at any time, much less for the police report.
I'll bet you that there were a number of powwows off, certainly probably not at the department, but in people's houses.
Dvorak, Kaseric, Vogel, I think Couchet was probably sweating bullets because he knows he traced that mugshot. Peterson, because Peterson's just that kind of guy. Those five. And then Vogel and Link, I think, were probably the latchkeys. They were probably, that's probably who. Anybody else? Can anybody else think of anybody else that probably was involved?
Bushman.
But yeah.
Good one too.
Mike Bushman.
Who are the two? Who are the two? The Hermans?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think that that's, this is what we got. And I mean, I can't figure out what they did wrong. They did something, because I think the original plan was to have the crime scene off the property, and somehow someone at the jail forgot to turn off the jail phones. I don't know what happened, but they had to move the crime. And that's what we see. We see this, they had a better plan than this. This is what's sloppily thrown together, hodgepodge. This is
I think that, my opinion is that this Teresa's demise fell in their lap and they hodgepodged it, because if you look at the origination of when this all began, let's say November 3rd, when the missing person report began, and then just go a year from that, and how much changed between then and that point in time. And it even changed probably a little bit more after that, but they had the nuts and bolts by, June, July. And then, of course, there was some few things that had to be buzzed around, but I think no matter what, the goal was to halt the depositions and to re-jail Avery, whatever it took. So,
and sorry, Jack.
No, you're
that
fine.
Also explains the circus act done by Ken Kratz during the court, how he basically trivialized all the past events that Stephen Avery faced. He goes, "Oh no, that's all irrelevant. Don't worry about it. It has got nothing to do with this case." which is very interesting because that's the approach that Griesbach took in The Innocent Killer, right? Half of his book was about the 1985 case and the horrible wrongdoing by the state to Stephen Avery. And then suddenly he flips, oh, we've got this murderer, he did this, he's a scumbag. You think to yourself, oh my God, is this the same author? You don't think Michael Griesbach should have said, well, shit, they actually tried it the first time round, nearly succeeded. What makes you think they won't try it again? And he was right in the middle of it, and he didn't see it. He refused to see it.
And the bizarre dive he did into the German in that book, and then just kind of dropped it. Like, that was weird, I thought.
He said that he was going to get a lawsuit against him if he kept on persisting about the German.
Really? I never read his book.
Yeah.
I never read his book.
I haven't either.
It is weird how Dr. Silkman just said he's all about poor Stephen Avery and what they did to him in 85, and all of a sudden he just flips and totally believes, the the 05 deal is totally legit, and it's weird.
And also he makes a lot of mistakes in the Stephen Avery case, a lot of errors. And I'm reading it and I'm going, this is complete, utter garbage. Like when he wrote the first part, it was meticulous, very rich, very detailed, backed everything up, right? Because he was right in the middle of it. But when it came to the Hallbach investigation, he was completely clueless, right? He was reliant on third-party information.
Yeah, like he was just watching the press
he was
reports.
Watching evening news. Correct.
Evening news,
Correct. He cobbled it together as an afterthought, which is really bad. He should have just focused on the 1985 case.
That's funny you bring that up, Doc, because the militant infamous guilty or puzzled, there was a question. I think I may even said this already, but somebody questioned about the 85 case and then moving forward the Hallbach case and the validity of both. And Puzzle said, 85 case, it was wrongful conviction. And basically he got screwed talking about this conspiracy or whatever. But then the 2005 case, oh no, everything was done great. Everything was
like crazy.
Everything was above board. That's really the way. That's really what he said. And I questioned him on it. He never commented. He never commented at all.
And what is Griesbach's handle on Reddit? It's something
Twist and Tundra or something.
That's it. Yeah. If you look at his comments and his post, they are just so utterly devoid of factual information. Yeah. It's like he calls Ken Kratz, and Ken Kratz gives him a spiel, and he types it.
That's funny. That's funny.
There's no effort. And, you think you're a criminal attorney, whether you're a DA or on the defense side, because you have a desire, like an investigative reporter, to know what happened, right? Yep. And there's none of you get a sense that he just doesn't care to look beyond the surface. It's almost like he's afraid.
Well, I mean, for a guy like Griesbach, he's entrenched in the state, and that's basically is his retirement. I mean, I'm sure he's picked up other work, but he's entrenched, and he's probably making this huge swap. I mean, you can tell that. I mean, I can tell. I think everybody else would agree that he's just following the party line because he really kind of feels like he has to.
Did you notice that on the documents we were reading yesterday that he's CC'd still? So he's still on this case, on the Colburn case. I thought that that Colburn had gotten new attorneys. He just got additional attorneys.
I think. Well, Griesbach's not the lead. I think he's still on the case, but he's not a lead. he handed it off to somebody with more resources than.
So is he doing that because is he still on the case because he wants his cut? Is that what that's about?
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it's very and that's another thing. That case is just bizarre. I posted some stuff in on Discord today from just from the emails exchanged between the two, and it is just utterly, it's like night and day reading the legal styles, their assessment of the facts of the case, of the proceedings, of phone calls. And I mean, this lady, this Barker, she is just a drama queen. I mean, she's perfect for Wisconsin, because a perceived slight is turned into, like
war.
a friggin' an attempted murder.
Yeah.
How dare you not, how dare you not graciously bend the rules of procedure and offer me something? Because and I mean, and it's tragic. Losing your parent is tragic. I couldn't imagine losing my parent. But your personal life has nothing to do with your professional life, especially not at that level.
Not
right?
at that level, no.
No. And then she's trying to use the fact that she was out of the office and working on her laptop and doing other people's work instead of her own, and she didn't want to go downstairs and have to use the scanner. I mean, she's literally doing all that, but then she's not giving Netflix a break because there was a friggin' global pandemic going on. It's absurd.
Yeah.
It truly is. I don't see how a judge is going to read that stuff and not say, what in the hell is this woman thinking?
Well, they very well might. You might get a month.
The problem is the judge went to Marquette too. They understand that language.
Yeah. That's
oh shit.
Yeah, but no, you know what's weird is Barker actually graduated from Harvard.
Wow.
Yeah.
To make you guys feel any better, I graduated from the college which was Marquette's rival. Does that make you guys more happy?
Woo! Yes, it does.
Yes.
Yes.
You made the team.
I'm hungry.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, I don't want to say that there was some giant plot to kill Teresa Halbach, but if we take that part out and we just say that there was the framing part, right? People have framed others for a hell of a lot less. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt there. I mean, to me, there's absolutely no doubt something was going to happen, regardless if it was Teresa or something else. Something was going to happen to stop those depositions.
2 weeks, I guess you have a point. It had to happen soon. Something. It was like now or never. I'm not against that theory that someone who is sympathetic to the police or to the county wanted to quote unquote help them out, and they didn't have knowledge of the plan, but they came upon this, right? I don't know how that would fit in, but there's just so many possibilities yet.
That's right, and there's too much we don't know.
Right.
But anyway,
and another thing, is one of these main players that we're naming, Kasurik, Vogel, one of those could have simply gave somebody $5,000 to take care of it, so that way their hands aren't quote dirty. Quote.
That's my theory.
Even if it didn't involve money, it could have been some other favor. Said, hey, we got a problem here.
I just saw that video posted that who was it? Had Manitowoc County collects used drugs. They collect the old pills. Well, if you need an informant, and that's currency for street purpose.
Yeah, and also it's untraceable because it's actually written off as being destroyed.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. So, And Rimmaker was he gave away a lot because he said that Wisconsin leads the nation, I think he said, in amount of destroyed medication collected. So how does it makes you want to dig into that, because they're always about these embedded confessions, right? I listen to Dr. Silkman when he's talking on Uncle Ken, and it makes you wonder how the hell a state as small as Wisconsin is leading the nation in the collection of destroyed medication. So is this something that's not actively monitored by the federal government, and they can write it in and they get a credit, and are they bilking the government? I don't put anything at all past this state.
Well, I mean that's really a political that's a political statement that, you know, if Rimmaker is going to make that kind of bold statement, that's saying, hey, we're against, you know, these drugs being on the street, whether they collect anything financially or not. It's still a political thing to say we're the good guys. Look at what we did.
Yeah.
All right, we're at 3.5 hours. Any other comments before we? Yeah, it went by quick.
Nope, that's it. I'm good. I'm hungry.
I just want to say thank you to Jack and Susan for just again, great reading. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you bet.
Bet. And there's going to be more. I don't know how many more, but we'll see. I'm pushing them to do all of them again, because from my standpoint, the depositions are gold. They are pure gold. There's so much revealed in them. It's just eye-opening. It's, you know, and if we take another problem that I found that, and I know that we all see this, if we just stand back for a second and look, this shock of seeing something. Oh, you know, we see it, and then we see it a couple more times. And it's like, you know, we just kind of write it off because nothing is done, and that's the other end of it. Nothing happens to correct these problems. So I know that, you know, some of this stuff has been said before, and we're going to continue to say it and continue to say it. That's my standpoint. But before we get out of here, I want to take a few minutes and first thank everyone for coming and listening to us talk and get these read. Really appreciate that. But the next thing is coming up on Wednesday. And when's that going to be? 12 Central? Is that right, Christina?
Yes, it is.
We're going to have Christina's noon Central. We're going to have the premiere of Christina's new podcast. And tell us the name of it.
The Crime Theory Exchange.
So, you know, she will go more in depth into explaining the format and what is going to happen. I'm sure she's going to give us some really good information and a good basis for some really good debate and conversation that probably some people aren't going to like on the other side of where we stand. Christina has a really interesting way of looking at these various things, these reports that we come across and things that we read by that she's like, wait a minute now, what the hell are you trying to pull? In so many ways.
Very good at deciphering. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's led us off into some other areas of just of the Avery case alone. There are other cases too. There are some really interesting cases out there of those that are interested in true crime and this genre. It's a fascinating thing to me. So we'll get that rolled out. We want to give her a good push off. So we'll be doing that on Wednesday. Hopefully everybody can come and participate. I'm sure that Christina would love to hear from you. I know we all will.
Please. Yep. It's for everybody.
You go ahead and take the mic there for a minute before we get out of here, before I close this out. Anything you want to say?
Well, I look forward for everyone to join us Wednesday at 12 Central. We're going to be discussing, of course, this case and, of course, Gregory Allen, and just trying to connect the dots. I miss the Thirsty for Theory Thursdays and all the great podcasts that And I just want everyone to participate because I think that we're really close to making connections on a lot of levels. And we got 2 innocent men sitting in prison, and we got a serial sexual predator who comes up for parole every couple of years. And there's just something wrong with that. And you know, and if we don't try and do something about it, I'm afraid no one will. So please join us. Thankfully, Jax is going to stream it, so it should go off without a hitch. And I look forward to seeing everyone there.
Yeah, learning that streaming part of it was a huge learning curve for me when I started with the open mic. I mean, it was a really, really interesting idea from Linda, and it grew from that, learning how, taking a little bit of the burden off of Zoe because of the time zone difference. And, it's sometimes difficult. Real life jumps in your way, and it's difficult. You're trying to fulfill this obligation, but, other things come up. So it's good to have more than one of us that can stream. And it's been a hell of a learning curve for me, but hopefully I worked out most of the hiccups. We've not run across in a while that somebody comes and says, "Hey, we can't hear anything you're saying." Really screwed up a couple of times, but anyway, again, appreciate everyone coming, participating. We hope that, I don't know what's going to be for the next open mic. I don't know that it will be another deposition, but we may continue down this path, but we'll see what happens this coming week and what we may have to present. Look forward to everybody coming on Wednesday if they can. Really appreciate everybody coming. If you like what we do, please hit the subscribe and leave your DNA on the thumbs up button. Comments in the below after the video processes. And we'll see you the next time. This has been a Foul Play production.
See you, everyone.